Hey y'all, just real quick before we dive into the main program, I just want to give a quick word about the platform that I'm using, Anchor FM. It's been a good platform so far with the program and just distributing. It's a multi-platform sort of deal, so it sends out to Spotify, Google, iTunes, a whole list of hosting sites. So it's definitely a good place to start if you're a beginner or who wants to step into this field. You really don't need any experience at all. You just do it, right? So the sponsorship has been a good deal for me so far, and definitely a good way to build on the program that you want to distribute or you want to record. So yeah, so definitely check it out, Anchor FM. Also, if you want to skip these sponsorship intros, you can go to my Patreon, Collapse Talk, and for $1 you can get early access, ad-free access, as well as other exclusive content that I build on and work on. So definitely check it out there, Patreon. But yeah, so now without further ado, we will jump into the main program. Well, y'all, welcome back to episode 25 of Collapse Talk, and this is your host, Gabriel, and I hope y'all have had a safe and festive Christmas or holiday week, however you're celebrating this time of year. Being an atheist myself, I'm not exactly part of that Christian tradition, but it's still nice to have, the holiday season and just to spread good vibes and good cheer. Unfortunately, I had to quarantine, self-isolate for this Christmas. I was planning to go down, but somebody got sick at my job, so I just wanted to be safe and isolate. Although I think I've passed that symptomatic window period. Still have to get a test, but I'll have to figure that out eventually. However, I wanted to make a quick recording because I was kind of like, wasn't exactly sure with that last episode if I can get one out, but since I've been cooped up all week with this break period, I figured I might as well do something before the new year and just to talk about different events that have occurred in the last couple weeks since the last episode, and also just a recap of this year, because I feel like 2020 is going to go down in the history books as the beginning of the decline, or I guess just when everybody kind of understood, oh yes, this is collapse, or yeah, if there's any history books after all this chaos. But yeah, I just wanted to talk real quick about what I did, and it was because with these holiday seasons, it's not necessarily that I'm antisocial. Well, actually, I am antisocial. It's just, it's nice for one part to be with, family and good vibes. But there's another side where I'm just like, I don't want to do this shit. I just don't want to do this, Yeah. But, hopefully if I hold up with no symptoms, I can go down for New Year's at least and just be with people. I don't know. I just, for it was actually kind of relaxing just to be on my own for the first time for Christmas, just to do whatever I wanted. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of a loner in that sense. Or, hopefully I could in the future be with somebody who, just likes being chilled out and such. Yeah, I mean, again, atheist, so Christmas doesn't really mean much to me outside of just, traditions and stuff. But yeah, just a quick word on that. But, before I talk about really the show, the meat of the show, I have 3 segments, of course, right, where I talk about the domestic area in the United States, international, and also in the natural world. Just giving my, experience for this Christmas time. But then also I wanted to give a quick word about a bit of a controversial release with the Cyberpunk coming out. That was the anticipated game of the year, probably the decade, if I'm being honest. We'll see what else comes out in the next couple of years, but yeah, this is one of the more anticipated releases, and I didn't get it. I'm not exactly in a position to just buy a fully priced $60 game right now. I just started working, so I wanted to save up, but this is one of those moments where I was kind of glad I didn't pre-order. Of course, I was planning to play this on my PC, and I don't think the majority of those crashes and bugs are on the PC, although I could be very wrong. It's been mainly the last generation consoles and the PS4 that people have had controversy and issues with, because these next gen PS5, they're being sold out, or the demand is not reaching the supply, or it's there's just a whole lot going on. And I sold my Xbox actually, so I'm just stuck with my PC, which is not terrible. It's just I just felt like I was getting too distracted with the Xbox. But yeah, just real quick, I wanted to talk about that at least. It's kind of, I just find it ironic because there was all these reports of the developers crunching and not being compensated properly, and if I'm being led to believe, what leaks or inside sources are saying, it had more to do with the shareholders or the corpos. So it's kind of ironic that you have a game that's like an anti-corporate piece and then falling victim to that exact environment and culture. So yeah. So I mean, they're gonna do patches, of course, and CD Projekt Red, they have that reputation of being one of the good guys in terms of game developing. So this is certainly a blow to their reputation that they have to fix, and I believe that they'll address a lot of the issues. I mean, they've already had patches and such, but it sucks that, and I haven't seen too much. I've only really seen, because if you pay attention to like the trailer, the whole trailers that they've released, it's mainly like the first act with the heist, right, and such. So I mean, I watched the corporal run. I only watched until like the main heist with the biochip. Then after that point, I didn't want to spoil too much. But I have seen some gameplay, so the gameplay it seems nice, at least with the combat. But it doesn't have exactly that Rockstar, because everybody's spoiled with Rockstar's open world development and their design, and yeah, like there's been some pretty I've seen some glitches, and it's not necessarily like optimization, but just like the open world AI or police just spawning literally out of thin air right in front of the player. Like, yeah, so there's certainly some shortcomings in that area. So, and again, it kind of sucks that this happened with a game that otherwise, like, the story that people are saying is good. And, yeah. So you have some people that are enjoying the game, which is good, but that shouldn't detract from any criticism that are warranted. But then again, I haven't played it, so I can't necessarily talk from first-hand experience. So, with that being said, and I don't want to be stuck in there too long. With that being said, just some more opening comments, but I wanted to talk about the domestic area with the United States and the decline here. And it's interesting that, now I shouldn't say interesting, but we had a car bomb terrorist attack in Nashville, and it sucks that it had to happen on Christmas morning, so people are about to wake up and open presents, and then an explosion, car bomb, hits downtown. And it was a pretty significant explosion. No, I say car bomb, but it was really more of an RV. So it was a pretty significant explosion that happened there. and it's believed to have been targeting an AT&T Center building, or they also believe maybe some federal government agency, surveillance agency. Yeah, so this is a pretty significant attack that occurred, and there's some interesting details that came out. So there's now reports that saying that there was like some gunfire or sounds of gunfire before that, before the explosion, early in the morning, like 6:30, and also like there was a PA system warning people to evacuate, saying that there's a bomb and it's going to explode. I also believe, or I read somewhere, that the bomb detonated before the countdown completed. So there's hypothesis that they were trying to get people to, because there were police officers on the scene evacuating folks, and so they were led to believe, because the explosion happened before the timer went out, that they were trying to get as many people out on the street, trying to evacuate before the explosion happened. And again, the shockwave is pretty significant. I mean, like, you see some different videos where it's at least a couple miles or, away from the explosion, and like you can still feel the shockwave. And so imagine just like being in the building right next to it. And yeah, when it first occurred, I was just like, is this some incident? Is it an accident? But they're saying now it's an RV car bomb explosion. They don't exactly know what the motivation behind it is, or who's going to claim responsibility. So again, I'm not necessarily going to impart my views on the ideological motives behind it. It just is interesting how to piece together, how they're able to piece together so much just from like the disaster explosion area. So I'm reading from a local source, so WKRN, that's in Nashville, and just reading their reports and findings from the officials and also just from the scene, right? So, quote, federal officials are reportedly making progress in the downtown Nashville explosion case. U.S. Attorney Don Cochran said at a news conference Saturday that authorities have over 500 leads. There are believed to be no other active threats to Nashville or the surrounding area. We have no indication of additional explosive threats. No other explosive devices were discovered during our secondary sweep on Friday, Cochran said. Metro Nashville Police Chief John Drake said the federal government is conducting their investigation and officials are working to try to get people back into their businesses as soon as possible. About 40 businesses were impacted, and all businesses' buildings will have to be cleared through codes. At around 6:30 a.m. Friday morning, an RV exploded near the intersection of 2nd Avenue and Commerce Street. Police say officers were initially in the area investigating a shots fired call when the explosion happened. 3 people have been taken to the hospital with non-critical injuries. The explosion is believed to have been an intentional act. Access to downtown is restricted as authorities continue to investigate. So this is all that they've really released so far. But I mean, they're just starting to piece together different leads that they can, and they've already released, like, it's actually pretty amazing, like the amount of surveillance that they've gotten, how much they can piece together, just the timetable, the timeline, right? So they already like have images of the RV driving around, and they were already having like in-depth examination of the driver. Of course, the image is super blurry, but they were still able to get like some kind of profile. So yeah, this is just I believe this is a turning point in terms of what I've called, well, I haven't necessarily used this term directly, but I saw a comment and it kind of highlighted exactly what I was feeling. A so-called cold civil war, right? So, I mean, we've got already like factions fighting in the streets, all right? I mean, there's already been like multiple rallies and fights in the capital city, Portland, right? So we have different groups that are fighting in the street. People have already been killed over this. People have already died. And now we're getting the escalation of domestic terrorism with car bombings. And this is only the start. This is only the start. I believe this is something of a test. Somebody was, I was watching the Memeology 101. So take it, it's not exactly an official journalist, but that channel is still pretty good in terms of hidden stories, right? And in that channel, they were pointing out that this bombing was attacking an AT&T building, and it was also believed to have some government surveillance program or department in there as well. And this could be a test, at least, to see how the grid essentially would be affected. The communication grid would be affected. They showed that there was an outage for AT&T users in the area. One of the airports, the international airports, had to shut down due to communication errors. I mean, and this is certainly, yeah, it's not hard to believe that. Of course, I'm just like, spitballing here because I don't really know anything. It's just, because we talk about terrorism in America, and it's not necessarily a new thing. It's just, a more recent phenomenon, and we're still a bit traumatized from 9/11. However, domestic terrorism has always been a problem in the United States. I mean, we can look at Timothy McVeigh, right? Other different attacks, the Boston bombing. Of course, people are more focused towards Islamic terrorism. I don't think it's necessarily that. However, it's domestic terrorism has always been a problem in the U.S. between left-wing or right-wing groups, especially like when you take the 70s. I mean, the statistics from the domestic terror bombings from that period, the 60s and 70s, like if that happened today, it would be bad. Like, I mean, of course it was bad then, but we have so much exposure and people can report a lot of stuff. So you would see multiple bombings over months and weeks. And like, well, what would that do for our psyche? What would that, yeah. So as I said, because you're not really seeing, in terms of cold civil war, you're not necessarily seeing the establishment, the Democrats and the Republicans at each other like that. In fact, they're pretty much like secretly in bed with each other. It's having to do with these radical groups on the left and the right. And I know a lot of folks, like, Antifa sympathizers wouldn't like me criticizing them. It's just, radicalism can exist in any form, even if it's righteous. Like, it can happen. I mean, with all due respect, when I look at Antifa, I see an undisciplined rabble, and I would be worried about them if they were in my area, like, if I'm being honest with you. So it just goes to show how quickly any kind of group, no matter their cause, can basically be derailed because of, it's just, So again, this, as I said, is a bit of a turning point in the cold civil war, quote unquote, and we can expect to see more bombings and attacks soon. Of course, it's interesting that they said they have over 500 leads, so that's really interesting. So maybe they already had intel on a possible attack. And I'm also interested to learn more about the so-called shots fired before. Like, it's going to be weird to see how they time this and, piece it together and how exactly events unfolded. But then again, this is like the CIA, or not necessarily CIA, although let's not, put it out of the question, but, hearing from the FBI and all these other agencies about something like this, certainly you could make the argument for a false flag. I mean, it's not impossible, so we'll have to see what happened there. But at the very least, with this attack, nobody was killed, although I have read a report where there were quote-unquote human remains in the scene, so maybe somebody was unfortunate enough to, be on the blast area. But yeah, they report at least 3 people having to be injured. 1 officer was apparently knocked out. Again, the explosion, people think the explosion is like the shrapnel and the fireball, but it's also the shockwave, and that can cause extreme internal damage. So, that's my thoughts go out to Nashville and how they're dealing with this. And regardless of who is responsible for this, the fact that they did this on Christmas morning, that makes them a bit, in my view, makes them assholes. Like, come on, man. People are trying to, like, have a good, Christmas morning, open gifts with their kids and family, and then a fucking bomb goes off. Like, how are you gonna win support with that? So who knows what the motive behind this was or who was responsible? But I certainly feel like this is gonna be a trend coming into the new year. and forth, because this is only going to escalate further. So that was something that I wanted to talk about, and wanted to move on because we got that happening, and then we also have the electoral certification process that was completed. So, Joe Biden is officially the president-elect, right? And, I also wanted to speak on the, not just the Democrats, because of course the Democrats are falling in line, but also just like the split and the rift between Republicans over this and their reaction to this, because you certainly see like Mitch McConnell and a lot of the paleo, I guess, conservatives, you could call them, they're starting to like fall in line. And then you have the Trumpers that are, and his base, because Trump's base, they do not want to accept this result. So just want to read real quick from Business Insider, at least, just talking about the different events that are occurring with this. Right, so voting in the 2020 presidential election ended on November 3rd, with now President-elect Joe Biden projected to win more than 270 electoral college votes necessary to secure the presidency. Insider and Decision Desk HQ has, as well as other major news outlets, projected Biden to be the winner over November 6th and November 7th, but Biden won't officially become the president-elect until each state formally certifies its results, which occurs on a different timeline in each state, and is set to finish on December 8th, Tuesday. After results are certified, electors from those states are gathering and voting on December 14th, bringing an end to weeks of failed litigation to overturn the election results and unsuccessful efforts by President Donald Trump and his allies to directly pressure state legislators to subvert the results. Continuing, in the United States, Americans don't directly elect the president. Contrary to popular belief, there is no constitutional right to vote for president. Instead, the Electoral College, a system that was devised in the 18th century by the nation's founders, involves states appointing a number of electors equal to the number of representatives they have in Congress. All states, except for Maine and Nebraska, use a winner-takes-all system in which the candidate who wins the most votes earns all of the state's Electoral College votes. This system has resulted in some presidential elections like the 2000 and the 2016, in which the winners of the national popular vote loses the Electoral College, sparking the criticism that the Electoral College is fundamentally undemocratic and disenfranchises voters. And they offer a different timeline of the process, right? So that was happening there. They're canvassing, or I should say their electoral process. And, they're still trying to, like, get in the way of it. There's already talks of, like, supposedly Donald Trump had a conference or a meeting with some of his advisors, and for whatever reason, the talk of martial law came into play. I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt if you like, but it just goes to show that he's still trying to, like, pull something up and still trying to, like, one up, or I don't know, man. It's concerning that we're in this position that he can't just say, or he's just delegitimizing it, or doing what he can to he can't just say, okay, I lost, right? The fact that he has to leave it up in the air, up to debate, like he doesn't. I don't think he's essentially like conceded, like, okay, I'm conceding. He's still trying to like find a way to, like, they just want to overturn it, and he does have support with his GOP or some representatives, and he certainly has his army, his base supporting that. So I mean, like, it's terrible that we're in this position that I don't think he would launch a coup. I don't think he's that dumb, but it's terrible that we're in a position that he could. That's the issue. He's in a position where he can do it, and yeah. So I want to talk about this meeting at least, because we had the electoral process and the certification, and I believe there's also like another vote in January. So that's something that we have to deal with. But yeah, I wanted to talk at least about this meeting where there was some there was some drama between his counselors, right? So, reading from some CNN Business. A meeting President Donald Trump held to discuss overturning the election result alarmed some of the White House staffers, people who are used to Trump's inflammatory and anti-democratic rhetoric. With only a month remaining until President-elect Joe Biden will be sworn into office, Trump has been ramping up his efforts to remain president, while also trying to convince millions of Americans that election fraud is to blame for his presidential loss. That's nothing new, but a heated Oval Office meeting Friday in which Trump heard arguments about invoking martial law to stay in office had some Trump officials sounding the alarm to the press. Michael Flynn, Trump's pardoned former national security advisor, discussed the martial law plan on right-wing television network Newsmax last week and was invited to the White House Friday. Trump dismissed reports of the martial law discussion as fake news in a tweet Sunday, but two people familiar with the matter told CNN that the plan was argued in the Oval Office Friday, although it remains unclear if Trump endorsed the idea. And so here's a tweet that he put out on December 19th. Martial law equals fake news, just more knowingly bad reporting. Nevertheless, even the mention of martial laws may fan the flames of many supporters clinging to the belief that the election was fraudulent. That could incite violence to bring the idea into fruition. Quote, in the conspiratorial conservative base of supporting Donald Trump, there are calls of using the Insurrection Act to declare martial law, said Elizabeth Newman, former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump and advisor at Defending Democracy Together on CNN's Reliable Sources. When they hear that the president is actually considering this, there are violent extremist groups that look at this as a dog whistle, an excuse to go out and create violence, she said. It's a concept she calls acceleration, in which violent extremist groups, especially white supremacists, try to overthrow the United States government. These groups believe that will take place through a civil war and look to accelerate the chaos, accelerate the coming of the civil war. So when they hear that the president is open to the idea of martial law, we may see certain groups mobilizing to commit acts that, in their minds, are a justification for the use of the Insurrection Act, Newman said. So, of course, this is CNN Business, so you might want to take this with a grain of salt. I'm certainly a bit more cynical of what CNN puts out, but it's, it's not out of the question. It's just, again, we're in the twilight zone, so anything is possible at this point. And yeah, certainly discussions of martial law, I mean, we had a whole summer of riots, so he easily could have invoked it then. I mean, people were calling for him to do it, and yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. In fact, it is interesting though, because and I'm going to talk about the stimulus bill that was passed in a second, but there are concerns over the quote unquote eviction apocalypse that is going to hit. That's going to be severe, going to put millions of people possibly on the streets, and it's going to end December 31st. It's going to run out. And I'm certainly concerned about the reaction when people are getting evicted en masse. Again, I could just be like, I could be hyperbolic about this. But I certainly feel like the amount of evictions that will hit will be such that you'll see unrest on a scale that makes the George Floyd riots look like a cakewalk, like a play date almost. And I feel like Trump could use that. I mean, again, I'm just spitballing. I'm talking out my ass, but I feel like the unrest that would occur from all those evictions, I think he could use that as a reason to invoke martial law or the Insurrection Act. I mean, because and I'm going to talk a little more about the coronavirus stimulus, quote unquote stimulus package that's coming out. But our leaders are so ineffective, they're so useless, that people are just going to start, they're going to start being out in the street. They're going to start being evicted, homeless. They're going to see that their lives are falling apart, but that nobody's looking out for them, and that's going to create a whole mess. I mean, it's just, the unemployment protections. I mean, so many protections are running out, and our leaders are they're in another planet. It's we live in a failed state, right? And that's not a surprise at this point. So, as I was saying, right? So there's talk of martial law, and what I'm hypothesizing, which could be wrong, is that in the opening days of 2021, we'll see so much unrest that he might use that as a reason to declare martial law. Oh, we can't, do the inauguration yet because we have all this chaos yeah. So we'll see. So there's that talk that they had, those worries, and I wanted to speak on the federal eviction moratoriums, as I was saying. So the moratoriums expire in January, and they're hypothesizing that at least 40 million Americans will be homeless or are at risk of being homeless. I'm reading this from USA Today. So, quote, "It's safe to say that Shayla Black's life is not what she imagined when she left her job in the magazine industry in January, feeling like she needed a change. Before long, her quest for new opportunities was upended by massive job losses driven by the COVID-19 crisis. As Black's finances started to dwindle and the rent continued to accrue at her second-story Harlem apartment, the 28-year-old found herself having to make some difficult choices. You're just told in a society like you have to pay your rent by any means necessary," Black said. "I was ready to pay my very last to pay rent, but how would I pay my electric? How would I get food? This fall, her landlord slipped in a notice under her door, either pay thousands in back rent or risk eviction," it said. Despite a national moratorium prohibiting evictions for non-payment of rent, no one should ever have to experience the threat of being pushed out of their home, Black said, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Black is one of millions on the verge of being evicted, with the federal eviction moratorium set to expire at the end of January, unleashing what advocates say could be a housing catastrophe of historic proportions. Without federal intervention, they fear, as many as 40 million people could be displaced amid an ongoing and worsening pandemic. "We're facing potentially the worst housing and homelessness crisis in our country's history," said Diane Yentel, CEO and president of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition in Washington, D.C. The eviction moratorium approved by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention was originally set to end December 31st. It was expected to be extended through January by Congress under a $900 billion COVID relief package that also includes offering $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. The figure requested by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition in a letter submitted last week to the CDC and co-signed by 1,500 housing advocacy groups. The least the federal government can do during a once-in-a-century pandemic is assure each of us that we're not going to lose our homes in the middle of it, Yentel said. The $25 billion, she said, was not nearly enough to meet the actual need, but it was a step in the right direction. And then it's also showing that Black and Latino renters are hit hard by this. And yeah, I want to read another part, right? So it's also showing, because there was, I don't know if y'all saw this, but you're seeing a lot of pundits online and on, CNN and all these different places, these mainstream medias, and they're saying, oh, well, we don't need a stimulus check because people are going to save it or they're not going to spend it. I mean, like, it's insane that we're in this position that we have to, like, literally, because if we didn't create a mess, if we didn't, make this noise, they would have never included that initial $600 payment. Like, it wasn't there to begin with. Like, we had to, we had to make some noise for that. And now, Donald Trump is saying that he wants to make it $2,000, which is a good deal. And of course, he's breaking with his Republican base, with Mitch McConnell. Although it's not exactly as though there's some Democrats that are against that too, the $2,000 increase. Nancy Pelosi, she made it like a unanimous consent vote, or like she could have easily I don't know, man. It's just, they're going to vote on it on Monday, and we'll see what happens there. But this is a complete fuck up of a response to a depression, and they have no idea what they're inviting. They really don't. So anyway, continuing, right, with this report. So millions of Americans spend bulk of paycheck on rent. Even before the pandemic, about 21 million renters were already considering cost-burdened, according to Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies. That is, they were paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. Of those, 11 million spent more than half of their paychecks on housing. The situations for renters has been bad for a long time, says Chris Herbert, the center's managing director. The pandemic has compounded an existing problem and really highlighted the weaknesses in our safety net. Herbert made the remarks during a panel discussion held last month in conjunction with the release of a center-issued report on the nation's housing. States have tackled the response to varying degrees, with some urging eviction courts to suspend operations except for emergencies, while nonetheless allowing landlords to file proceedings short of kicking their tenants out. That means once the moratorium does end, said Yentel of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, evictions will happen quickly because in many cases all the proceedings will have happened and the only step left to take will be the removing of the person from their home. Many might opt to leave before evictions proceed, fearful of damaging their long-term credit. An eviction can have long-lasting effects on people's housing history and access to credit moving forward, said Martha Galvez, a senior research associate for the Urban Institute's Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center. It can take people a long time to dig out from under that. So, yeah, this is a pretty lengthy report here, but it just goes to show that this is, as I said, this is a housing and homelessness crisis of epic proportions. This is literally an apocalypse, a housing apocalypse that I don't think many people understand how bad this is. Like, this is the only country that's had this response. And, when I tell people this, they're so quick to be like, well, because I bring up, Germany, right? Or some other European country that had some kind of UBI or some kind of furlough or nationalization of payrolls. And it goes back to, oh, well, you just gotta, you gotta look at the history and the culture differences. And it's just, it turns into a freedom question. Like, okay, it shows that you're more concerned about the freedoms of landlords, corporations, their freedom to exploit working people. And the fact that we have leaders that are just completely disconnected from reality, completely disconnected from the needs of their constituents that they have been elected to represent. And again, this is a failed state. I also see a lot of people saying, well, this just goes to show that you just can't depend on the government. And they completely miss the point that we have a government to look out for our needs. Like, what's the point? Like, can we just stop pretending this is a democracy? This isn't a democracy. And I'm very short of just not voting anymore because I have no faith that this is going to be fixed. We're going to sit back and let it burn. That's really all that's left to do because it doesn't seem like anybody in power wants to fix it. They just, use the office to enrich themselves. Again, I try not to be surprised anymore, but I'm still like, wow. And I'm also in this position as well, like the fact that I'm dropping out, so that will make it certainly harder for myself to leave the country. I can't necessarily go somewhere else because if I have no degree, then that's going to lower my chances, right? And I heard a lot of points from conservatives that where they complain about immigrants coming to this country, they're always like, why they got to come here? Why can't they just stay where they are, their homes, and make it better there? But then they look at a person like myself who's trying to make things better, and they just like, you can't. It's just, again, lizard brain, and anyway, I again, I'm just like trying to still process how we're in this position, how we're in a position where the response is always to enrich the elites. I mean, you all saw the CARES Act, right, and the upward transfer of wealth and the rich getting richer. This wealth inequality is continuing to increase, and I just, it's shocking to me, right? Also looking at my, I guess, social media circle, not necessarily like personal friends, just people I went to high school with, but just seeing how entrenched they are into the corporate world now, where they're living comfortably, and then a working person like myself is falling through the cracks, or at least I got this job, so it just feels very much that I'm treading while I'm watching everybody else like run away with the bank. It's just, I don't get it. Well, I do get it, because this country isn't meant for working people. It's just, yeah. Anyway, so that's what's happening there. And, this continued response towards this crisis of helping the elites. And again, you can see it with this new coronavirus spending bill, which is a laughing stock of a bill because they call it the stimulus, but then they give us $600. And here's how corrupt and dysfunctional, right, our system is, because this bill, the spending bill, is over 5,000 pages. And all these different representatives were given 2 hours to vote on it, to read over 5,000 pages. They were given 2 hours, and they voted it through. And people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, they most likely just didn't read it, and they voted it through. And I read that Tulsi Gabbard, she voted no because she couldn't read the whole thing. So much respect to her. But the more I read into this spending bill, the more like my blood boils. And again, I just try to tell myself, don't be surprised. But this is just, it's just disgusting. It's just anyway. Let's just read it, right? So I'm reading from New York Times, right? Quote: tucked away in the 5,593-page spending bill that Congress rushed through on Monday night is a provision that some experts call a $200 billion giveaway to the rich. It involves the tens of thousands of businesses that received loans from the federal government this spring, with the promise that the loans would be forgiven tax-free if they agreed to keep employees on the payroll through the coronavirus pandemic. But for some businesses and their high-paid accountants, that was not enough. They went to Congress with another request. Not only should the forgiven loans not be taxed as income, but the expenditures used with those loans should be tax deductible. High-income businesses have had tax benefits and unprecedented government grants showered down upon them, and the scale is massive, said Adam Looney, a fellow at the Brookings Institution and a former Treasury Department tax official in the Obama administration, who estimated that $120 billion of the $200 billion would flow to the top 1% of the Americans. The new provision allows for a classic double dip into the payroll protection program, as businesses get free money from the government, then get to deduct that largesse from their taxes, and it is one of hundreds included in a huge spending package and a coronavirus stimulus bill that is supposed to help businesses and families struggling during the pandemic, but critics said swerved far afield. President Trump on Tuesday night blasted it as a disgrace and demanded revisions. Congress found plenty of money for foreign countries, lobbyists, and special interests while sending the bare minimum to the American people who need it, he said in a video posted on Twitter that stopped just short of a veto threat. The measures include serious policy changes beyond the much-needed $900 billion in coronavirus relief, like a simplification of federal financial aid forms, measures to address climate change, and a provision to stop surprise billing from hospitals when patients unwittingly receive care from physicians out of their insurance networks. But there's also much grumbling over other provisions that lawmakers had not fully reviewed, in a process that left most of them and the public in the dark until after the bill was passed. The anger was bipartisan. Members of Congress have not read the bill. It's over 5,000 pages, arrived at 2 p.m. today, and we are told to expect a vote on it in 2 hours. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York tweeted on Monday, "This isn't government, it's hostage taking." Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, agreed. The two do not agree on much. It's absurd to have $2.5 trillion spending bill negotiated in secret and then hours later demand an up or down vote on a bill nobody has had time to read, he tweeted on Monday. The items jammed into the bill are varied and at times bewildering. At times bewildering. The bill would make it a felony to offer illegal streaming services. One provision requires the CIA to report back to Congress on the activities of Eastern European oligarchs tied to President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia. The federal government must be required to set up a program aimed at eradicating the murder hornets and to crack down on online sales of e-cigarettes to minors. It authorizes 93 acres of federal lands to be used for the construction of the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library in North Dakota and creates an independent commission to oversee horse racing, a priority of Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the majority leader. Mr. McConnell inserted that item to get around the objections of a Democratic senator who wanted it amended, but he received agreement from other congressional leaders. Alexander M. Waldrop, the chief executive of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, said on Tuesday that Mr. McConnell said many times he feared for the future of horse racing and the impact on the industry, which of course is critical to Kentucky. And so on. I mean, we can continue on, but this is a pretty lengthy article. It's just, you see all the money that they have towards that. There was like supposedly $33 million towards a democracy program, which is just trying to instigate a coup in Venezuela. Billions towards a so-called gender program in Pakistan. $500 billion towards Israel. I mean, it's really just it's really a headache just having to see this, and again, $600. That wasn't even part of the initial deal. Like they and now that Trump wants to raise it to 2,000, it's just like throwing another curveball into the negotiations, and Republicans are going to vote against it. Or this is such this is a clusterfuck. That's what it is. It's a clusterfuck, and the incompetency of our leadership, their inability to, look out for our interests, the people, the American people. But, instead they have to go to their donors and to their, again, I really don't understand. It's just, it really shows our decline, right? And the dysfunction of our Senate and Congress, the different branches of government, and the disconnect, right? Because there was also a report of their expansion of their clinic. So they have a single payer system, right? So they have all these benefits and they get to expand everything for themselves. But then for people like ourselves, it's just $600, which would go directly towards rent, basically. Which, in some places, $600 is not even enough. Like, it's nothing. Like, it's just, like, it's hilarious that Trump came out asking for 2,000, and the fact that he basically outlefted the Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in power, and he was also calling for stimulus payments and the deal that the 1.2 billion or trillion, I should say, deal that they were trying to negotiate initially, but then Nancy Pelosi made a political calculation to not accept it. Yeah, I can't believe that it's not that I can't believe it. It's just, it's disgusting that this stimulus payment is being used as a bargaining chip. Basically, they're holding the American people hostage. That's what's happening. So, well, we'll have to see what happens Monday, what kind of vote they make. But, I just see all across the line this bipartisan disdain for this. And it's interesting that like you're now seeing Republicans saying, yeah, we need, payments like, so they're okay with this kind of socialism, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, we'll have to see on Monday what kind of vote they make there. But this is just a bungled response. And as I said, there's no talk of any kind of eviction protections or moratoriums. So December, I need to get some ammo, if I'm being honest. I need to get some ammo because I'm not expecting things to be good those opening weeks of January. Yeah. So that's what's happening there. So we have this bungled response with the coronavirus stimulus. And then we also have what is, it's mainly being relegated as Twitter drama. You're not really seeing any kind of talk about this in mainstream sources, media sources, but this is certainly a huge issue now, particularly with the progressive left, with this forced to vote. So with Jimmy Dore, he came out talking about a plan. Now, I didn't fully understand that Jimmy Dore was such a divisive figure, particularly with the left. Now, before I go any further, I do have to say this much, that I do agree with him on the strategy, and I certainly also agree with him on his criticism of the Democratic Party. So take that however you like, but, just because he talks loud and he curses a lot, the dude's from Chicago. What do you expect from him, right? And, it's not even that, because this is the time to be pissed off. This is the time to, demand some action, because, I'm sorry, y'all keep playing nice with these people who don't care about you. They don't care. Politicians are mediocre people. They're people that, you have to intimidate. You have to make, and not necessarily with physical violence, but you have to intimidate and threaten their position of influence and power. That's why we vote them in there in the first place. So regardless. So this isn't about him. And I know there's a lot of, drama now with the TYT. I'm in no position to offer any insight on that because, I used to watch TYT in my earlier progressive days, but then for whatever reason, I just kind of stopped watching it. I don't know why. I just it just felt off. Something was off. And, I stuck more with Kyle Kalinske. And, now that I'm seeing this different side of TYT that's becoming more corporate, I'm hearing stories of union busting, so it's one of those situations where they kind of join in the dark side, even though they kind of portray themselves as a savior. Anyway, it's not my position. This all feels like I have a visualization in my head where, you have all these different leftist pundits, progressive pundits, having a battle royale in the Coliseum, and all in their late stage game, armor and equipment, and I'm kind of just walking in with a shiv and my loincloth, just level 1, just trying to stay in the shadows. But yeah, so anyway, that's my input there. But this strategy, right, where progressives, we have a slim margin of votes. Some saying a 15 seat lead. Others saying it really could go down to 5. But we have leverage as progressives, and the whole force to vote strategy of withholding the vote for Nancy Pelosi until she has a vote for Medicare for all is a good strategy. It's a good strategy. This is how you play politics, right? You got to maneuver and you got to leverage people and you got to, okay, I'll do this, but I'm not going to vote for you until, I get something in return. This is why I didn't vote for Joe Biden, because he wasn't, anytime somebody came out saying, hey, what about this? And he just said, go vote for Trump, or, you see how dismissive he is, as though you owe him a vote. It's just no, I didn't want, no. So anyway, so regardless of Dore, because this isn't about him, and he says it himself. This isn't about him. This is about Medicare for all people. And, this is the time to do it. Y'all said to vote for Biden and push him left. Well, when are we going to do it? When is it going to start? When is the push going to come? Because it's not just Biden, okay? You need leverage in the Congress and you need leverage in the House, because he said he's going to veto Medicare for all, so we have to ensure that we have a veto-proof majority, right? So, I mean, look, man, like, we don't need Joe Biden to get this through. We don't. So, yeah. Even that, like, I feel like he would just cave with enough pressure. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll double down. Maybe he'll, if we put protests out in the street, he'll, crack down on it, and which would show where he really stands and delegitimize him. It's just, like, we didn't end the war in Vietnam because Nixon just got tired of it. Like, we ended the war in Vietnam because people were out in the street and pissed off about it. And we just ended it. We got civil rights because people were out in the streets and were pissed off about it. So we need to be out in the streets for Medicare for all. We need to be out in the streets for student debt cancellation, relief, public school, public college. And it's not necessarily that people haven't been out in the street, but it's like they went out in the streets for Black Lives Matters. Okay, but you're just saying that. What actual policy platform are you putting out? Okay, we'll defund the police. Okay, that's not necessarily going to fix anything because the laws that we have in place are what's the problem, not the police, right? I mean, like, you got a lot of leftists that say defund the police, and yet they have no means to protect themselves against any kind of crime. Like, at least when I said defund the police, I bought some weapons because, it's just a logical conclusion. At least I'm willing to, look out for myself in that sense, Anyway, kind of just going in between back and forth and rambling. But I just wanted to say that much about the force to vote whole controversy. It's a good strategy. It's what we need to do. But I want to make another point, right? It's a good strategy, but it's just this leftist infighting that I'm seeing is why we're so weak and ineffective, because we turn against each other. And it really goes to show, like, I was reading comments about how this is a turning point, right? Where now we're seeing who's the real progressive and who's the poser. And in a way, this is good that we're doing this now, having this conversation, because now we're seeing who's full of shit. Again, we saw with AOC. I'm starting to be a little more cynical about her because, she's hesitant to actually bring this to a vote, and she's talking about sponsorships and this and that. Like, no, we need a vote. We need a vote. We need to make sure Nancy Pelosi understands that we're not playing around. Like, she needs to feel that, like, her position is in jeopardy. That's what she needs to feel. And it'll show, if she's willing to give up her speakership, that'll show who she answers to. That'll show her true colors. If we force a vote, and even if it doesn't go through, at least we'll see who was against it, who voted against it on record, and then we can, primary against them. Like, this is the time. This is the time. And I'm, saying this now, like, if there's a Medicare for All rally in DC, I'll try to make some plans to go. Because, like, this is, because I've lost a lot of faith with our system. But if we can get a serious movement out in the streets, I'll try to, request time off and try to get there. It will be like, I don't know how I'll do it, but, like, if there's an actual rally for Medicare for All, I'll go. And I'm making this promise now, but it's going to be difficult. But, this is a moment that I certainly don't want to miss out on. And I certainly, because I've just lost faith, and this is the last vestige of hope that I have for our system, that democracy is still alive. And if they actually, like, vote for Nancy Pelosi without giving her any kind of resistance, without forcing the vote, I'm never going back to the Democrats. And I'm fully going to put myself into whatever third-party organization, like, it's, like, it would essentially be my personal declaration of war against the establishment, and certainly the Democrats and fake progressives, like, because a lot of leftists are going to fall asleep with this new administration. Joe Biden is a Republican, and I will always stand by this. He's a Republican, and he's a more insidious Trump because he's the sleepy grandpa, my fellow Americans, and then he's gonna be in bed with the lobbies and corporations. So that's what I wanted to say there. There's a lot that I said in that little segment and talking about this, but I just, I know I ramble. I know I ramble and rant, and I just wanted to get this out at least and offer my input, no matter how small it is. So there's that. So there's the force to vote for Medicare for all. If we can't do it now, then when? I mean, because I'm not anticipating this administration to be effective. I'm certainly anticipating a red wave with the 2022 midterms. I mean, the Democrats did terribly in terms of, House seats. I mean, we lost seats. So, well, I shouldn't say we. They lost seats. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's enough about that. Just want to move on, and I want to talk about this distribution of the COVID vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, and just seeing like the how they're moving along with it. I certainly don't want to seem as though I don't want it to appear as though I'm an anti-vax person, but it just certainly is interesting to see this response, and also like reading reports of reactions people have had to it. Of course, people, they're going to have some kind of effect. So who knows? I mean, I don't know. So, yeah, we had different kind of reports. Like I read one report from MSNBC, actually, of a nurse getting a reaction to it. And I also saw one video of a nurse in Chattanooga that got her injection, and like 30 seconds later, she just passed out. So who knows what happened there? I certainly don't want to spread any misinformation about it, because I've certainly also seen Mike Pence. It's so ironic and hypocritical seeing all these different GOP senators getting GOP leaders taking the vaccine after they've essentially nurtured this skepticism towards the virus. Anyway, downplaying it, right? Or resistance to masks, or who knows? It's just whatever, because they're in position of power, and of course they're going to get it first. So it's just the name of the game, right? It's certainly going to be interesting to see how accessible it's going to be, and who's going to take it and who's not going to take it. And also just like regulations, right, where you would have to take like a card to show that you did it, like a compliance note, or who knows. So anyway, so I'm reading from CNN, right? And it's titled saying that the U.S. officials promised 20 million vaccinated against coronavirus by the end of the year, but it's going slower than that. Quote, while the coronavirus pandemic continued to surge through the summer and fall, federal government officials repeatedly offered a ray of hope, enough vaccine doses to vaccinate 20 million Americans by the end of December. But after the first weeks of vaccine distribution and only 9 days left to meet their self-imposed deadline, Operation Warp Speed is on track to fall short of 20 million shots in arms. One count from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows about 9.5 million doses have been distributed as of Wednesday morning, and just over 1 million people have been vaccinated, not even close to the 20 million goal warp speed originally set. Officials at U.S. Health and Human Services at the CDC say the agency's tallies are undercounting many vaccines due to data logs, but even accounting for reporting delays, the U.S. vaccination program appears to be taking longer than warp speed officials projected. One early hurdle, a 2-day U.S. Food and Drug Administration requirement to assess each shipment of vaccine for quality control, slowed down distribution. States were told by OWS to expect fewer doses for week 2 than originally planned, with the 20 million number seeming further from reach. OWS officials acknowledged Monday that they may not get there until January. We do still feel strongly that we will have allocated to the states by the end of the year 20 million doses of vaccines that will be available. General Gustavi Perna, Operation Warp Speed's chief operating officer, said Monday during a call. We feel confident that we will be distributing the end part of the vaccine no later than the first week of January for everybody to have access to. An HHS official said that nearly 16 million doses have already been allocated for states and jurisdictions to order, but as more vaccine doses are available, both Operation Warp Speed and the state and healthcare partners receiving the vaccine will also need to be able to scale up the complicated distribution and logistics needed to get vaccines from point A to point B. It does seem like getting to 20 million by the beginning of the year is ambitious. Dr. Marcus Plessia, Chief Medical Officer for the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, said, "Still, people seem to be really very encouraged about how the vaccinations are going." Plessia added, "Everybody seems to feel like they are using the supply that they have." So there's some more stuff here, but yeah, it kind of shows that they're falling short a bit of their goals. I certainly feel like this ineffectiveness is going to prolong infections. And already also we're reading reports of mutated strains popping out. Although they're saying that this vaccine may be able to handle it. It's just, the mutation just makes it more contagious or whatever. But yeah, we're seeing an increase in that mutation. Yeah, it's just, it's just where we're at right now. I mean, we already got 300,000 people dead, and that's going to continue to rise. I don't know. Again, this is just a bungled response because you're looking at other countries, like in New Zealand. They're saying that, if they have a surplus of the vaccine, that they're willing to hand it out to their neighboring countries. And of course, in Canada, they're distributing it in an effective manner. They have to have the army involved and such. So, again, we're just a laughing stock right now. People are just looking at us like, what the fuck is going on? Which, what can you do? Yeah, I just wanted to point that out with the bungled vaccine distribution that, they had this goal. And we'll have to see how else this continues. But, yeah, we're going to have to see. So, with that being said, with that bungled vaccine distribution, I wanted to talk about this video that I saw, or I'm sure most of y'all have already seen it by now. It's from Harris Bomber Guy, his video on the war on Christmas. And yeah, it was certainly a good video to watch, and as I need to be get more familiar with his work. I just wanted to at least, impart my views on it, because I certainly wanted to talk about that phenomenon, the cultural war phenomenon on the war on Christmas, but also just having to deal with the radicalization of, you could call, say, Christian fundamentalists in this country over, stuff like this. And I think it's more of a response to this secularization of our society and how they're pointing to, this is a clear sign of the rise of communism and Marxism and, the loss of our values or such. So there's certainly something to talk on there. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's H Bomber Guy. He calls himself Harris, right? So it's Harris Bomber Guy. There's a good video, about almost an hour long, and it's certainly informative over just the history of this culture war, which honestly, they always act like this has been going on for decades. This is such a recent phenomenon. It's, anyway. So there's certainly collapse themes in that sense. And I'm looking at all these different video essays, and I'm just trying to see how I could do something like that, which would take a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of research. So I just gotta take care of some, some unfinished business in terms of my life, and then I can be in a position to possibly release a video essay. I'm just trying to brainstorm on what I could do, and then also the video editing, the script writing. It's a lot of work, I bet, but that could certainly be an area to expand. But yeah, I just want to at least connect that right with our collapsing culture, right, and encompassing that. But yeah, H Bomber Guy, he's certainly a good video. her channel to check out, and definitely great content there. Pretty funny guy also. So there's that. I also wanted to talk about something that I've been seeing, right, about this wealth inequality, right, which is no secret anymore, but it's I'm reading this Fast Company, and they're just showing how, again, the workers are losing. We're losing, and we're seeing this upward transfer of wealth, and the rich getting richer. This wealth inequality gap continuing to grow. I mean, I'm already seeing a different dynamic, because those that are in the corporate field now, they're like shooting far, but they always act like a person like myself isn't working. And I fucking work, man. But like the wages that I'm getting aren't meeting the needs. And also, never mind that we're in a depression where I need a UBI or some kind of stimulus, So anyway, before I continue there, I just wanted to read on this Fast Company article what they're saying about this and the studies that they're finding, which is what they've described as shocking, right? So, reading, quote, just how far has the working class been left behind by the winner-take-all economy? A new analysis by the Rand Corporation examines what rising inequality has cost Americans in lost income and that the results are stunning. A full-time worker whose taxable income is at the median, with half the population making more and half making less, now pulls in about $50,000 a year. Yet had the fruits of the nation's economic output been shared over the past 45 years as broadly as they were from the end of the Second World War, until the early 1970s, that worker would instead be making $92,000 or $102,000. The exact figures are very slightly depending on how inflation is calculated. The findings, which land amid a global pandemic, help to illuminate the paradoxes of an economy in which so-called essential workers are struggling to make ends meet while the rich keep getting richer. We were shocked by these numbers, said Nick Hanauer, a venture capitalist who came up with the idea for the research along with David Rolfe, founder of the local 775 of the Service Employees International Union and president of the Fair Work Center in Seattle. It explains almost everything. It explains why people are so pissed off. It explains why they're so economically precarious. Quote, the $2.5 trillion theft, end quote. Notably, it isn't just those in the middle who've been hit. Rand found that full-time prime age workers in the 25th percentile of the U.S. income distribution would be making $61,000 instead of $33,000. Had everyone's earnings from 1975 to 2018 expanded roughly in line with gross domestic product, as they did during the 50s and 60s. Workers in the 75th percentile would be at $126,000 instead of $81,000. Remarkably, even those in the 90th percentile would be better off than they are now if economic growth had been shared as it was in the post-war era. They'd be making $168,000 rather than $133,000. Tally it all up, according to Rand, and the bottom 90% of American workers will be bringing home an additional $2.5 trillion in total annual income if economic gains were as equitably divided as they'd been in the past, leading Rolfe to dub the phenomenon the $2.5 trillion theft. From the standpoint of people who have worked hard and played by the rules and yet are participating far less in economic growth than Americans did a generation ago, he says, whether you call it reverse distribution or theft, it demands to be called something. The Rand data also makes clear who the winners from inequality are, those in the top 1%. Of course, they'd be in a less advantageous position if economic pie had been divvied up since the mid-1970s like it was previously. If that were the case, Rand says, yearly income for the average 1%er would fall from about $1.2 million to $549,000. Although he himself is a self-described zillionaire, Hanauer is an outspoken critic of the gulf between the rich and everyone else. He thinks and writes and agitates on these issues all the time, but even he was surprised by Rand's findings. In fact, he says that before the report was completed, he had done his own back-of-the-envelope math and wound up underestimating by a good 40% the degree to which workers' incomes have failed to keep pace with the GDP. It's startling, he says. Rand crunched the data in all sorts of ways, and the basic pattern held true for part-time workers, entire families, men and women, blacks and whites, urban dwellers and rural residents, and those with high school degrees and those with college diplomas. There is no way of slicing the numbers where people come out ahead, says Carter Price, a senior mathematician at Rand, who co-authored the study with his colleague Catherine Edwards, an economist. I was surprised by the magnitude of this. Price acknowledges that one weakness in the model is that it doesn't reflect people's total compensation, including the value of employer-provided health benefits. It also does not include monies received from the government transfer programs such as Social Security. It does not count rental income, dividends, and interest. It takes into account capital gains, but due to certain technical constraints, only for those above the 90th percentile. However, because these proceeds from the sale of property or an investment amount to just 2% of income for the bottom 99% of households, the authors say this wrinkle doesn't meaningfully change any of their conclusions. Indeed, for the vast majority of Americans, what they earn at work through hourly hours or hourly wages or a salary represent practically all of their income, and that is fully captured in the study. So, yeah. And, certainly speaking from personal experience or just having to deal with this, right? Yeah, this wealth inequality is going to continue to rise, and they keep pretending as though it's that we're not working. Like, I'm really tired of being like, nobody said it to my face, but they always act as though I don't like to work or I just want to sit and just collect paycheck. Like, no, I don't like being idle. I like to work. I like to feel like I have a purpose in life. But it doesn't necessarily help when I'm doing all this work, working 40 hours, close to 40 hours. And like, there's a reason I have no savings and Americans don't have savings in general because we're just saddled with so much debt. And you see that all the wealth is going towards a very select group of people. And, I see a lot of people making excuses for this, or they're just trying to protect their position. They act as though Medicare for all is an entitlement, or affordable, tuition-free college is an entitlement. It's like, okay, if I'm working 40 hours a week, I think I'm entitled to not be crushed by medical debt. If I'm a law-abiding American citizen who's working, earning a paycheck, like y'all keep saying I need to do, I think I'm entitled to not be bankrupted with medical debt if I'm sick, or if I want to go to college to, be crippled with debt for the rest of my life. I mean, there's a reason Americans don't have any savings, because they have so much debt to pay off. And, again, you have a lot of people making excuses for this neo-feudal system where people are just in perpetual serfdom, and they show more concern for the shareholders, the policies, the borrowers, or whatever you want to call them. It's asinine. It's again, and then it turns into a freedom question. Well, we got freedom. I don't know, man. They make all these weird excuses, and there's always these boomers. Like, there's no point of explaining this to a boomer because they don't have the capacity to understand how fucked my generation is, how fucked millennials and Gen Z generations are. Like, we hold the lowest share of wealth in history. Like, we hold at least like 4%, like single digit numbers. Where 50 years ago, when these boomers were living in a golden age, they had far more leverage. I mean, you could, have a high school diploma and have a house and a family by the age of 25. Like, so, there's a lot of expectation, especially as a man, because I'm supposed to be the breadwinner. I'm supposed to be the caregiver, right? It's just, you got to deal with these expectations and then the reality. And then they always try to point, towards, oh, well, what about this person you went to school with? Because they have all this money. It's like I'm not a hustler in that sense, I just want to work. But working people don't have a shot. It's just, I don't know. You got a lot of people that can afford to not think about all the issues that they have that are down the line, that people like myself, like, again, I'm dropping out, so I know I'm going to get hit with student debt. And when I hear people bring up these issues, what about health insurance? What about student debt? You're kind of proving my point. Why these need to be public services? Okay, because what am I paying taxes for? Like, shouldn't it go towards healthcare, education? Like, don't you think that should be what our taxes are? No, instead, endless war and corporate bailouts, right? And then they bail out corporations where executives give themselves bonuses, and then they lay off thousands of workers who then lose their health care. Like, they don't see the perpetual cycle of collapse of this depression. It's like the United States keeps stabbing itself in the heart, and then it's blaming the people telling them not to stab itself in the heart. Like, this is how insane this country is. So, anyway. Just going to move on from there, but I just wanted to talk about that. And before I wrap up with this domestic segment, I did want to talk about this disconnect from reality that I'm seeing with social media, particularly people in wealthy positions, right? We're in the middle of a depression, a crisis had never before seen, like quite possibly worse than the Great Depression, if we're being honest. And they have, because especially since it's Christmas, you got these people doing the gift giving and, having these, like, for me, it's silly. Again, if your family has, I don't know, it's just, they do the whole, like, the matching pajamas, right? It's just silly for me. And then, of course, people know it's silly, but I see this happening, right? Where people are posting on social media how happy they are and how great everything is, and literally people are on the verge of homelessness, financial ruin, like they're on the brink, and it shows the disconnect, because these people aren't talking about these issues. They use social media for, oh, look at this new car I got, oh, look at this new stuff I got. They use it to show off their material wealth and how successful they are, quote unquote successful, when they don't really run shit. Like, they're, the person who's signing your check, that's who really runs stuff. But anyway, it's a social media disconnect. And, of course, I use my platform to talk about it. And I'm seeing certainly, people are just saying, like, oh, it's not that you shouldn't talk about it. It's just, it's just the way you deliver it. Or, it's like, again, as I said before, the deeper I dive into this work, the less people want to be around me. I'm sorry. Because it's just, I'm going to be the doomer guy, right? The apocalypse guy. And these are especially people who can afford to not have to worry about these issues. When a working person like myself, we're just barely scraping by and, just having to deal with it. Yeah. So that's the comment that I want to make there. But, again, I don't want it to seem as though I'm bitter about it. It's just like, it's, as I said, disconnect, a lack of awareness also, because I don't hear anybody talking about the suffering that Americans, their own fellow citizens, are going through. I don't hear anything. They're not standing for anything. They're posers. And they say all these things about, you gotta vote for Joe Biden. You gotta vote for Joe Biden. And then now they're gonna go to sleep and they're not gonna say anything, because I'm not gonna shut up about Biden. I'm not. And I'm certainly gonna have a lot of issues, particularly with people who voted for Biden, who can't admit that they got played. So they'd much rather blame the person who's talking about these issues than actually look at themselves and look at the person that they put in power. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to say about the domestic area. And it's certainly been, I don't see things getting any better for the new year. We got a lot of blind optimists about 2021, thinking it's going to get better. I entirely anticipate more unrest, and Joe Biden is not going to fix anything. He's going to be an ineffective president, weak, and who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks? Because the next couple of weeks are going to be is going to be pretty explosive, especially on January 20th, the inauguration, but also just like, as I said, the moratorium, the eviction moratoriums are going to go out, eviction protections, all these different benefits, protections are going to expire. And they're still dragging their feet on this coronavirus spending over payments towards the American peoples. You saw how quickly they were tripping over themselves to bail out their corporate lobbies, and transfer all this, our money, taxpayer money, towards corporations. But then when they talk about Medicare for all, how are you going to pay for it? What? Increasing military spending, defense spending, but Medicare for all. Well, you see the cost and blah, blah, blah. This is an empire in decline, as we all know. But it's self-inflicted, so self-inflicted, and the leaders are not going to want to admit that it was their fault to begin with, so they're going to use scapegoats, and it's just going to decline. It's going to get nasty. So anyway, that's a domestic feel. That's not the main meat of the show, but that's certainly something I wanted to talk about. And continuing with the international segment, we're going to examine some new developments, especially with the coronavirus. So they're reporting a new mutation strain popping out in the UK. London was under a strict lockdown, and of course now different European nations are getting cases of this new mutation. In France, there was a report. I was actually seeing a report where these truck drivers were isolated, and they had Sikh organizations and communities making some food. In fact, they made some curry, and I'm a huge fan of curry, so those truck drivers must have been very happy, right? So yeah, so it was nice to see that at least. But they had their strictest lockdown again, and who knows what's going to happen with the next couple of weeks. But, as I said, everybody was anticipating for 2021 to be better, but this new strain might throw another wrench into everything, especially with lockdowns and such. So I just wanted to read from BBC. So new coronavirus variant, what do we know? Quote, the rapid spread of a new variant of coronavirus has been blamed for the introduction of strict Tier 4 mixing rules for millions of peoples, harsher restrictions on mixing at Christmas in England, Scotland, and Wales, and other countries placing the UK on a travel ban. So how has it gone from being non-existent to the most common form of the virus in parts of England in a matter of months? The government's advisors on new infections now say that they have a high confidence that it is more able to transmit than other variants. All the work is at an early stage, contains huge uncertainties and a long list of unanswered questions. As I've written before, viruses mutate all the time, and it's vital to keep a laser focus on whether the virus behavior is changing. Why is this variant causing concern? 3 things are coming together that mean it is attracting attention. 1, it is rapidly replacing other versions of the virus. 2, it has mutations that affects part of the virus likely to be important. 3, some of those mutations have already been shown in the lab to increase the ability of the virus to infect cells. All these come together to build a case for a virus that can spread more easily. However, we do not have absolute certainty. New strains can become more common simply by being in the right place at the right time, such as London, which had only Tier 2 restrictions until recently. But already the justification for Tier 4 restrictions is in part to reduce the spread of the variant. Laboratory experiments are required, but do you want to wait weeks or months to see the results and take action to limit the spread? Probably not in these circumstances, Professor Nick Lohman from the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium told me. How much faster is it spreading? It was first detected in September. In November, around a quarter of cases in London were the new variant. This reached nearly 2/3 of cases in mid-December. You can see how the variant has come to dominate the results of testing in some centers such as the Milton Keynes Lighthouse Laboratory. Right. And continuing, mathematicians have been running the numbers on the spread of different variants in an attempt to calculate how much of an edge this one might have, but teasing apart what is due to people's behavior and what is due to the virus is hard. The figure mentioned by Prime Minister Boris Johnson was that the variant may be up to 70% more transmissible. He said this may be increasing the R number, which indicates if an epidemic is growing by shrinking by 0.4. That 70% number appeared in a presentation by Eric Voles from Imperial College London on Friday. During the talk, he said, "It is really too early to tell, but from what we see, so far it is growing very quickly. It is growing faster than the previous variant ever grew. But it is important to keep an eye on this. There is no nailed on figure for how much more infectious this variant may be. Scientists, whose work is not yet public, have told me figures both much higher and much lower than 70%, but there remains questions about whether it is any more infectious at all. The amount of evidence in the public domain is woefully inadequate to draw strong or firm opinions on whether the virus has truly increased transmission," said Professor Jonathan Ball, a virologist at the University of Nottingham. So yeah, this is certainly a new development and certainly something to keep an eye on. It was they announced a lockdown, and I saw some concerning signs that it was causing a mass exodus from the city, London. And as we saw, this travel ban now from the UK. I mean, they already had a new strain, or they had a case in France with the variant, and they're also showing mutated strains appearing in different parts of the world. Not to say, I don't know necessarily if this is the same UK strain, but there is a strain that was reported in Nevada, a strain that was reported in South Africa, and another strain that was reported in Japan. So yeah, this COVID strain was bound to mutate. I mean, people were predicting this, or necessarily predicting it. They were just saying it was going to mutate, and we're now seeing it happen. It might just be the case that COVID is going to be here to stay. I mean, it might mutate quicker than we can get a vaccine out for it, which is, yeah. And not just COVID. I mean, we're going to experience epidemics, waves of epidemics. So this is just the beginning, really. So that's just something to keep an eye on. And again, 2021 could be a harbinger for more lockdowns and more unrest and more death, unfortunately. So we'll see there. But yeah, there's the travel ban. There's a lockdown, tier 4 lockdown, and that's going to have effects on the economy. Yeah. And, they have the lockdown and travel ban, but then there was also another development where the EU and the UK came to a Brexit deal. So, it's just interesting that they had this new outbreak right as they reached the deal. So we'll read about it, right, from Politico, what they're saying about this new deal that they made. So, quote, "The UK and the EU finally announced they had struck a deal governing their future trade relations Thursday after months of missed deadlines and stalled discussions. The deal will avoid tariffs when the Brexit transition period ends on December 31st and will be a boost to UK Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and EU leaders, all of whom were anxious not to be blamed if the UK crashed without some kind of agreement. We have finally found an agreement. It was a long and winding road, but we have got a good deal to show for it. It is fair and it is a balanced deal," European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told a news conference. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said during a Downing Street press conference that the British people knew it was doable, but were told it was impossible. "We have taken back control of every jot and tittle of our regulations in a way that is complete and unfettered," he said. "The deal must now be approved by all 27 EU countries, as well as by the UK and European Parliament. Though given time is so tight, the European Parliament will vote on the agreement retrospectively after it comes into force on January 1st. British MPs are expected to vote on the deal next week, although given Johnson's large majority in the House of Commons, he is not expected to face significant opposition. Follow along as reactions comes in across the continent." There's just different reactions, right? But yeah, they're going to vote on it. And there's whole different regulations, right? And fishing rights that they were about to get. Yeah, it's just different reactions from different leaders. Actually, I wanted to read real quick about the Spanish foreign minister. Yeah, about concerning Gibraltar, right? So, Spanish Foreign Minister Aranca González Laya hailed the deal, but noted that there will be no agreement between Madrid and London on Gibraltar. Quote, hashtag Brexit good news. Conclusion on negotiations between the EU and the UK. Thank you, von der Leyen. Michael Barnier. We will now study the deal and take decision. There is no agreement between Spain and the UK on Gibraltar. Talks continue. So that'll be interesting to see how those disputes will be settled. Yeah, it's just different leaders talking about it. But anyway, it is interesting that they did come to a deal. So hopefully in the future they will address that. Actually, let me read this other piece about Irish fishermen. Quote, fishermen in Northwest Ireland say they'll expect compensation from EU partners because they face losing too much of their mackerel catch. Those fish commonly start life off in Ireland's Atlantic coast and are caught as adults in British waters. In spite of a seismic effort to redress the imbalance of the proposed deal in recent days, not enough has changed, and our highly developed mackerel fishery stands to lose out dramatically, said Sean O'Donoghue, chief executive of the Killybegs Fishermen's Organization. Make no mistake, we will be seeking compensation from our EU colleagues to put right this grievous wrong. We won't accept this, he said. Moreover, we fully expect the Irish government to deliver the requisite compensation in the form of transfer of mackerel quota from other EU coastal states, which pro rata have seen a much less severe impact of their respective mackerel fisheries. And let me read also this. So the EU food groups see stormy waters if next phase goes wrong. 3 of the EU's biggest food and farming groups issued a joint statement welcoming the Brexit trade deal, but cautioning that Brussels and London need to get the next steps right. We must warn that stormy waters lie ahead for the agri-food sector and for EU-UK trade in agri-food products worth around 48 billion, I don't know what the EU dollars, right? If we don't get the next part right, euros, I'm sorry. So 48 billion euros if we don't get the next part right. Warned farm lobby warned farm lobby Copa Cogecha. I can't say that. Food group CELCAA and Industry Association Food Drink Europe. We all need to look at the details of the agreement to understand the full implications, but it is essential for EU and UK authorities to move at lightning speed to ensure businesses understand the new trade requirements, that border controls can operate efficiently from January 1st, and the Commission has a crisis management protocol. They added, failure to move quickly will lead to more border chaos and supply chain disruption that will not only put thousands of jobs at risk, but also impact the safe supply of affordable agri-food products to consumers. Yeah, so there's all different reactions because there's some that are praising it, others dismissing it or trying to call attention to it. The London mayor was calling or slamming it apparently. So Mayor of London Sadiq Khan said the post-Brexit trade deal falls short of what's best for London because it does not come close to the benefits we enjoyed as members of the EU. However, this is the deal now on the table. While we still need to see the detail, we now have a direct choice between this agreement or a catastrophic no-deal Brexit, Khan, a Labour politician, added. Yeah. So different takes on it. It's just interesting, but at least they have a deal. Because if there was a no-deal Brexit, who knows what would have happened. It could have been very serious there. And of course, it has a lot to do with food. I'm pretty certain that Britain gets supplied with food from the mainland. So that's going to be interesting there. Just, it's interesting that they're talking about Brexit, but honestly, like, if you look at history, the British Isles have been Brexiting all throughout history, so this is nothing new. But, I certainly feel like this is the beginning of frayed tensions in Europe as, resources start to dwindle. Who knows if Europe, the EU, the European Union, becomes more centralized. Who knows how that goes? Yeah, we'll have to see. But, the 31st, there's going to be a official deal made, and yeah, we'll just see how things transpire ahead. But it's certainly not out of the question that we could see the further splitting of the UK and, Scotland pushing towards independence. Who knows what happens, right? And already there's like tensions between the tensions again. I mean, it's already been pretty heated, but in Northern Ireland, right, Belfast, and Ireland is part of the European Union. So yeah, again, who knows what could happen there. So continuing with more international news, I mentioned before about continuing protests in India that were made by farmers, Sikh farmers, and you'll be hard pressed to find any American sources reporting this. I mean, maybe like Vice News or something, but this is the largest organized protest in human history. Well, they're saying 250 million people, and yeah, I mean, we'll have to see, because of course they don't we need a general strike in this country. We do, but of course, people are by design living on the edge of financial ruin, so they have to work. They can't afford a day off, and they certainly can't afford to strike. So I don't know how it would be achieved. Also, that class consciousness doesn't exist here. It just doesn't. People are just, it's every man for himself in this country. So I don't know how, I mean, if we did manage to do something like that, it would be a miracle, given how inactive a lot of the workers are in this country. Anyway, so reading from Al Jazeera, talking about this protest, right? Quote, the Indian government has reached out again to tens of thousands of protesting farmers who have been parked at the borders of the capital of New Delhi for almost a month, braving a chilly winter to demand the repeal of 3 controversial farm laws. In a letter to the Farmers Union, spearheading the protest, the Agricultural Ministry's top official on Thursday said the government was committing to reaching a logical solution to the issues they have raised and invited them for further discussion at a date and time of your choosing, according to Indian media reports. Quote, I would once again like to stress that the government has spoken to you with open mind on the issue raised by you and is ready to do so in the future as well. Please let us know a date and time as convenient to you for the next round, said the letter. 3 new farm laws were passed with little debate in September amid an opposition boycott in the parliament, where India's ruling Hindu nationalists, the BJP party, has a majority. The government says the law will modernize farming and increase incomes for farmers, but the farmers fear they aim to ease regulations around storage and marketing of crops will benefit big corporations and leave them at the mercy of the free market. Farmers' union leaders say that the laws would lead to the end of state-regulated buying of crops and a system of government-set minimum prices for their produce. Several rounds of talks between leaders of the farmers' groups and the government have failed to break the deadlock. The government has offered to amend the laws and said the regulated purchase and support prices of crops would stay, but the protesters, largely from Punjab and Haryana, insist that the laws must be repealed. We don't believe in the government's assurances. We want concrete proposals, not meaningless amendments. These laws are a death warrant for farmers, Union leader Darshan Pal said. Farmers' groups were open to further talks with the government, which must show that it had an open mind and good intentions, Pal said. Farmer union leaders have also accused the government of trying to weaken and discredit them by describing protesters as anti-nationals. You are dealing with protesting farmers in a manner as if they are not aggrieved citizens but political rivals. Samyutka Kishan Morcha, or United Farmers Front, a coalition of farmers' unions, said in a letter addressed to the ministry on Thursday. Farmers would be compelled to intensify their agitation further for their survival if the government continued to treat them in this manner, the letter said. The protesters said they were prepared for the long haul and the new groups were coming in while some returned home, said a spokesman for a form of farmer unions. The farmers are parked near at least 5 border points on main roads leading to into New Delhi, which are now partially blocked. They cook and eat on the road, sleep in tractors and trolleys turned into temporary shelters, which trail for up to 10 kilometers, 6 miles at places. Hundreds of volunteers, NGOs, and sympathetic local people are helping to keep the protest alive, Mishra said. Near the Singhu border, locals have opened their homes so that the women among the protesters can use the toilets. One gentleman in Panipat brought a tractor load of cauliflower one day. A person with a dairy is giving off 250 liters, 66 gallons of milk every day. Farmers go back to their villages to bring vegetables, grains. People, especially from the Sikh community, have donated blankets and tents. So, continuing, opposition demands repeal of laws. Meanwhile, India's main opposition, Congress Party, pressed the government to call a special parliamentary session to withdraw the new agricultural laws. The Prime Minister wants to help 3 business people by introducing the farm laws, said Rahul Gandhi, the great-grandson of India's founding Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. The farmers will not go home, he told reporters after meeting President Ramnath Kovind on Thursday to demand a joint session of Parliament to discuss and repeal the laws. Police in New Delhi detained dozens of Congress leaders and workers as they tried to march towards presidential residence, including Priyanka Gandhi, Rahul's sister. Police said in a statement 58 men and 6 women protesters, including several leaders, were detained for violating the coronavirus pandemic measures. They were later released, police said. Yeah, so this is a bit ongoing protest and situation in India, considering farmers and workers. And yeah, I mean, this is certainly something that could escalate. I mean, they're already saying that they're willing to escalate it and willing to agitate. And yeah, it's going to get more confrontational the longer this prolongs itself. And, you know, again, it just shows the capabilities, if people are willing to band together, how much pressure they can put on this, you know, or just not necessarily ours, but just administrations and governments in general. You know, it just requires organization and requires mobilization. You know, I just feel that, you know, at least I don't know, because there's such a fear of any kind of workers movement or any kind of socialist leaning, left leaning kind of movement, progressive movement, because people are, I mean, this is a result of, you know, the lack of education, lack of understanding of history. So, of course, people are easily swayed, or they just don't care because, you know, in a capitalist system, they're not really looking out for others. You're really looking out for your own profits and motives. Or, yeah, so who knows? Yeah. Anyway, it does give me hope to see this kind of movement in a place like India, and it's really incumbent upon, you know, your programs like myself and other independent sources to bring this to light, because this is a huge movement that's occurring in India, and we really need to take notes on this because we need a general strike. Like if our leaders are going to continue to fuck up, like we need to get a movement out. We need to get some kind of rally or some kind of general strike or something, because that's the only way that they'll realize that's the only way that they're going to do anything. Like if we get out in the streets. But of course that could bring other stuff. So we'll have to see there. So continuing on, I wanted to talk at least about, this is kind of, I could have mentioned it with the domestic sphere, but I did want to mention it at least with the international because it considers Iraq and other responses. But Trump recently had like a whole wave of pardons, and considering officials and other sources. But I wanted to bring attention to the pardoning of these Blackwater defense contractors, and the response or the reactions of the Iraqis that were the victims of their actions. And I mean, I'm looking at the Associated Press and like all these people, like all four of them, right? So these guards from left to right, Dustin Hurd, Evan Liberty, wow, really? Nicholas Slayton and Paul Slow, whatever. On Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020, President Donald Trump pardoned 15 people, including Hurd, Liberty, Slayton, and Slow, the four former government contractors convicted in a 2007 massacre in Baghdad that left more than a dozen Iraqi civilians dead and caused an international uproar over the use of private security guards in a war zone. So these, Rambo wannabes were just driving around Baghdad, and there's video of it. They recorded themselves doing this, but they're just like shooting into cars, and it's insane. And Trump pardoned them. And yeah. So I'm going to read from the Associated Press. Quote, the courtroom monitors carried the image of a smiling 9-year-old boy as his father pleaded for the punishment of 4 U.S. government contractors convicted in shootings that killed that child and more than a dozen other Iraqi civilians. What's the difference? Mohammed Kinani al-Razak asked a Washington judge at an emotional 2015 sentence hearing between these criminals and terrorists. The shootings of civilians by Blackwater employees at a crowded Baghdad traffic circle in September 2007 prompted an international outcry, left a reputational black eye on U.S. operations at the height of the Iraq War, and put the government on the defensive over its use of private contractors in military zones. The resulting criminal prosecution spanned years in Washington but came to an abrupt end Tuesday when President Donald Trump pardoned the convicted contractors, an act that human rights activists and some Iraqis decried as a miscarriage of justice. The news comes at a delicate moment for the Iraqi leadership, which is trying to balance growing calls by some Iraqi factions for a complete U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq, with what they see as the need for a more gradual drawdown. Quote, the infamous Blackwater Company killed Iraqi civilians in Nisour Square. Today we heard they were released upon personal order by President Trump, as if they don't care for the spilled Iraqi blood, said Salih Abed, a Baghdad resident walking in the square. The United Nations Human Rights Office said Wednesday that it was deeply concerned by the pardons, which it said contributes to impunity and has the effect of emboldening others to commit such crimes in the future. The Iraqi foreign minister said the pardons did not take into account the seriousness of the crimes committed and that it would urge the U.S. to reconsider. Al-Razak, the father of the slain boy, told the BBC that the pardon decision broke my life again. Lawyers for the contractors who had aggressively defended the men for more than a decade offered a different take. They have long asserted that the shootings began only after the men were ambushed by gunfire from insurgents and then shot back in defense. They have pointed to problems with the prosecution. The first indictment was dismissed by a judge and argued that the trial that ended with their convictions was tainted by false testimony and withheld evidence. Paul Slow and his colleagues didn't deserve to spend 1 minute in prison, said Brian Heberlig, a lawyer for one of the 4 pardoned defendants. I am overwhelmed with emotion at this fantastic news. Though the circumstances of the shootings have long been contested, there is no question the September 16, 2007 episode, which began after the contractors were ordered to create a safe evacuation route at the car bomb explosion, was a low point for U.S.-Iraqi relations, coming just years after the Abu Ghraib torture scandal. The FBI and Congress opened investigations, and the State Department, which used the Blackwater firm to provide security for diplomats, ordered a review of practices. The guards would later be charged with the death of 14 civilians, including women and children, in what U.S. prosecutors said was a wild, unprovoked attack by sniper fire, machine guns, and grenade launchers armed against unarmed Iraqis, and so on. Robert Ford, who served as a U.S. diplomat in Iraq over 5 years, met with the widows and other relatives of the victims after the killing, handing out envelopes of money in compensation and formal U.S. apologies, though without admitting guilt since investigations were ongoing. Quote, "It was one of the very worst occasions I can remember in my time in Iraq," said Ford, who teaches at Yale University. "That was just horrible. We had killed these people's relatives and they were still terribly grieving. The widows mostly took the envelope silently. Some of the adult male relatives of those killed spoke up bitterly. 'How could you do this?' Or, quote, 'How could you do this? We must have justice,' Ford recounted in an interview Wednesday." Adding to the angry fallout among Iraqis was the involvement of Blackwater, a security firm founded by Eric Prince, a former Navy SEAL who is a Trump ally and brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. The company had already developed an unfavorable reputation for acting with impunity, its guards frequently accused of firing shots at the slightest pretext, including to clear their way in traffic. So, yeah, I can continue on, but Blackwater just seems to be at the forefront of war crimes and just, being pardoned. And yeah, anyway, this is no surprise, but this is why, the U.S. are the bad guys. We are the largest source of terrorism in the planet. Although we like to talk about freedom, but it's just, you read stuff like this and you just understand that, like, we're not, we talk about freedom, this and that, but we're not what we're, yeah. Anyway, with this pardon and other officials that got pardoned, right, it just goes to show that Trump was really, like, trying to get some stuff on the way out. Who knows? I mean, he did the $2,000, curveball into the stimulus deal, and some people are blaming him for that. But then he pulls stuff like this where I'm just like, come on, man, like, you had me for a second. So, yeah, who knows? With the pardon and the ramifications there. But I just wanted to point out, at least with the U.S. relations with Iraq, and, that they're going to remember what we did. Like, they're like, I don't think we're fully, like, thinking this out in terms of our proxy war with Iran, but Iraq now was under Shia control, and they have slowly been cozying up to Iran. So they're really gonna, like, we're on thin ice already. So stuff like this is definitely gonna, like, force them to, like, or at least have them demand the withdrawal, which we're not going to comply with. The U.S. is not going to comply with the full withdrawal. We're just going to sour tensions longer. And if conflict does erupt with Iran, it would not be surprising for me to see Iraq, maybe not officially back Iran, but certainly not doing much to help the United States in that conflict, or maybe sabotaging it. Who knows? I mean, again, remember, like, and I want to talk about the embassy, right? But, the year started out with massive riots at the U.S. embassy because we had taken out Shia militia leaders. Like, that whole war scare that we had at the beginning of the year was mainly our fault, not because of killing Soleimani, but we had killed a Shia militia leader, which provoked massive riots at the embassy, and yeah, it just spiraled out of there. So I mean, like, you talk about stuff like this and talk about the war crimes we commit, and you welcome you get a lot of backlash from the alt-right, or the warmongering, even Democrats. I mean, like, we're talking about, like, withdrawal, and they're oh no, like, they don't want to withdraw because they have something to lose, or who knows. So we had that with the pardons in Iraq, but then also another development in Iraq that occurred was the attempted bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Quote from Wall Street Journal, right? Quote, "The barrage of rockets launched at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad Sunday was the largest attack on the capital's green zone since 2010, numbering 21 missiles," the top U.S. military commander for the Middle East said. Iraq's president has denounced the rocket firings as a terrorist act and said that the targeting of diplomatic missions had tarnished the nation's reputation. An after-action review by the U.S. Central Command, however, indicated the attack was much larger than the 8 rockets that the Iraqis initially reported. The rocket attack appears to have been countered by the American CRAM radar-guided defense system that the U.S. has deployed to protect the embassy. American officials say the other rockets missed their mark. And the CRAM is like one of those defense systems that like shoots those tracers in the air with the minigun. So it's pretty cool to see it in action, but it just goes to show how like effective their response was. But if they didn't have that defense system, like it could have caused some serious damage. So continuing, quote, no Americans were hurt in the attack, which damaged two buildings in a gym, which troops and embassy personnel used for exercise. It wasn't yet clear if any personnel were inside the gym at the time of the attack. About 8:30 p.m. local time, several cars parked nearby in the embassy compound were also damaged. All 21 rockets hit inside the heavily fortified green zone, where the embassy and the base hosting troops from the U.S.-led coalition are located, with about half of those rockets landing inside the American embassy compound, an official said. One Iraqi soldier was injured and vehicles in a generator. One Iraqi soldier was injured and vehicles in a generator at an Iraqi apartment complex near the U.S. Embassy complex were also damaged, Iraqi security officials said. General Frank McKenzie, who leads the U.S. Central Command, which oversees U.S. military operations in the Middle East, said it wasn't clear if the attack was orchestrated by a rogue militia or specifically directed by Tehran. U.S. officials said the weapons are believed to have been supplied by the Iranians, but no group has claimed responsibility for the attack. I do not know the degree to which Iran is complicit, said General McKenzie I do not know the degree to which Iran is complicit, General McKenzie told the Wall Street Journal Tuesday. We do not seek a war. I don't actually believe they seek one either. In a statement Sunday, Secretary Mike Pompeo blamed Iran-backed militias for the attack and urged the Iraqi government to bring them to justice. On Wednesday, Mr. Pompeo, Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller, and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien met to discuss options to dissuade Iran and the Shiite militias it supports from attacking U.S. personnel in Iraq, a U.S. official said. In September, Mr. Pompeo warned Iraqi officials that the U.S. was prepared to close its embassy in Baghdad if the rocket attacks didn't cease. Following the meeting at the White House, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter, our embassy in Baghdad got hit Sunday by several rockets. Guess where they were from? Iran. All caps. Some friendly health advice to Iran. If one American is killed, I will hold Iran responsible, he wrote. The attack comes during a critical period in the U.S. relations with Iran as the Trump administration has sought to step up the pressure on Tehran, and the incoming Biden administration has signaled its plans to re-engage diplomatically with Iran, trying to restore the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement and then seek more stringent constraints on Iran's nuclear program. Tensions have also been raised by an attack earlier this month on an oil tanker docked at the Saudi port of Jeddah, which U.S. officials believe was carried out by a remotely piloted boat provided by Iran to the Houthi Yemeni rebel militia. But essentially, there's just increase in tensions with Tehran, and yeah, who knows what's going to happen in these next couple of weeks. I really, because I mentioned something about Trump trying to take advantage of any unrest that could occur in the opening weeks of January, and also he could take advantage of this if some kind of conflict occurs with Iran. He could certainly take advantage of that as well. Who knows? It's funny actually, like there was a tweet where he said something along the lines with Obama. He said, he's going to try to start a war so he can continue his control, or some crazy tweet. I mean, yeah, so definitely projection there is not out of the question. I'm not, we're in the twilight zone, as I said, so I'm not, I certainly see him trying to do something weird with Iran now. So, again, that's something to keep an eye out for. Hopefully he doesn't act stupid. And, we have, as they're saying here, we have a U.S. cruise missile submarine in the Persian Gulf. And we also have a carrier group in there as well. Yeah, the USS Georgia. So again, I don't know, man. This is such a mess that could, a wrong move could set everything off. Who knows? So there's that. So continuing. Again, this should have been more on the domestic area, but it certainly does consider like international cyber warfare. So I wanted to at least talk about it in this segment. So, reading from The Guardian, there was reports of a massive cyber breach, a cyber attack, and they're trying to point blame somewhere. So some are saying China, some are saying Russia, who knows? So just want to read real quick. Recent news articles have all been talking about the massive Russian cyber attack against the United States, but that's wrong on two accounts. It wasn't a cyber attack in international relations terms, it was espionage. The victim wasn't just the US, it was the entire world, but it was massive and it is dangerous. Espionage is internationally allowed in peacetime. The problem is that both espionage and cyber attacks require the same computer and network intrusions. The difference is only a few keystrokes. And since this Russian operation isn't at all targeted, the entire world is at risk, and not just from Russia. Many countries carry out these sorts of operations, none more extensively than the US. The solution is to prioritize security and defense over espionage and attack. Here's what we know. Orion is a network management product from a company named SolarWinds with over 300,000 customers worldwide. Sometime before March, hackers working for the Russian SVR, previously known as the KGB, hacked into SolarWinds and slipped a backdoor into an Orion software update. We don't know how, but last year the company's update server was protected by the password SolarWinds123, something that speaks to the lack of security culture. Users who downloaded and installed that corrupted update between March and June unwittingly gave SVR hackers access to their networks. This is called a supply chain attack because it targets a supplier to an organization rather than an organization itself and can affect all of a supplier's customers. It is an increasingly common way to attack networks. Other examples of this sort of attack include fake apps in the Google Play Store and hacked replacement screens for your smartphone. SolarWinds has removed its customer list from its website, but the Internet Archive saved it. All 5 branches of the U.S. military, the State Department, the White House, the NSA, 425 of the Fortune 500 companies, all 5 of the top 5 accounting firms, and hundreds of universities and colleges. In an SEC filing, SolarWinds said that it believes that fewer than 18,000 of those customers installed this malicious update. Another way of saying that more than 17,000 did. Yeah, that's a lot of vulnerable networks, and it's inconceivable that the SVR penetrated them all. Instead, it chose carefully from its cornucopia of targets. Microsoft's analysis identified 40 customers who were infiltrated using this vulnerability. The great majority of those were in the US, but networks in Canada, Mexico, Belgium, Spain, the UK, Israel, and the UAE were also targeted. This includes governments, government contractors, IT companies, think tanks, and NGOs, and it will certainly grow. Once inside a network, SVR hackers followed a standard playbook, established persistent access that will remain even if the initial vulnerability is fixed, move laterally around the network by compromising additional systems and accounts, then exfiltrate data. Not being a SolarWinds customer is no guarantee of security. This SVR operation used other initial infectious vectors and techniques as well. These are sophisticated and patient hackers, and we're only just learning some of the techniques involved here. Recovering from this attack isn't easy because any SVR hackers would establish persistent access. The only way to ensure that your network isn't compromised is to burn it to the ground and rebuild it. Similar to reinstalling your computer's operating system to recover from a bad hack, this is how a lot of sysadmins are going to spend their Christmas holiday. And even then, they can't be sure. There are many ways to establish persistent access that survive rebuilding individual computers and networks. We know, for example, of an NSA exploit that remains on a hard drive even after it is reformatted. Code for that exploit was part of the Equation Group tools that the shadow brokers, again believed to be Russia, stole from the NSA and published in 2016. The SVR probably has the same kind of tools. Even without that caveat, many network administrators won't go through the long, painful, and potentially expensive rebuilding process. They'll just hope for the best. So this continues on. But yeah, there's a pretty significant hack that occurred. And it certainly shows a liability in U.S. cybersecurity, and as they're saying in the world as a whole. Yeah. And already, like, there's already talk of like financial sanctions and retaliations. I'm sure that President Biden is going to use this as fuel to, or pretext, I should say, for sanctions and confrontations with Russia. I mean, who knows? It's interesting to see that the cyberware is like a new front in warfare, and they're hacking and espionage and such. I think it's mainly just to like get a leg up to at least have an effect on, say, like the power grid or communications, or getting ISPs right. So it's certainly they're trying to like just break through that firewall. So that's something to keep an eye on, and just down the line how they're going to deal with cybersecurity. So yeah, so that's another interesting development. So that's really what I want to talk about in the international field. And so I was wanting to talk about the natural world, the final segment. And it's interesting to see like different weather events now in the winter time, where, I mean, we've just passed the winter solstice, so now we're officially in winter. It is interesting to like go out in the day, right, when it's bright and sunny, so you feel that heat. But then once you get into a shadow, it's cold and frigid. So like you're still dealing with that summer, or I shouldn't say summer heat, just the sunlight and the heat there. But there's also I've seen different reports and videos of floods around the world, and this is mainly from a Reddit user, the Aquarium Paradigm, and he's released videos of different floods in Rio de Janeiro, Zambia, and Indonesia. Significant floods. So that's something that's happening there. So yeah, I'm sure these weather patterns are going to be more extreme. And yeah, I mean, just floodings and different events. I did also want to talk about the winter storm that's hitting the Northeast right now. People are like, oh, well, it's the winter time. How about that global warming? It's more to do with just the intensity of these weather events, right? So, of course, given that we're experiencing climate change, there's more moisture in the atmosphere. So weather events such as this is going to have huge effects, right? We get the polar vortex and then other different effects in the weather fronts. So yeah, so I want to talk about this blizzard that's hitting the Northeast, or they call it a nor'easter, right? So, quote from CNN, quote, a large winter storm that brought blizzard conditions to the Midwest was hitting much of the East Coast on Christmas Eve, bringing snows to parts of the South and rain to the Northeast. The combination of heavy rain and existing melting snow from last week's storm could lead to flooding from the mid-Atlantic to New England. Winter weather advisories are extended as far south as northern Georgia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. New York City and the surrounding areas could now see wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour and 2 to 4 inches of rain through Friday morning, according to an updated forecast from the National Weather Service. A coastal flood advisory includes the entire southern shore of Long Island, coastal Connecticut, Westchester, and areas surrounding New York Harbor, according to Weather Service. Parts of Pennsylvania had received up to 2 inches of rain on Thursday evening. Quote, anyone dreaming of a white Christmas will have to settle for a windy and soggy holiday, end quote. New York City Emergency Management Commissioner Deanne Criswell said, however, the hazards are real and we want every New Yorker to prepare for the potentially damaging winds and heavy rain. But there was snowfall elsewhere in the east and south. Knoxville, Tennessee had received 2 inches by early evening, while Beverly, Kentucky notched 4 inches. Londonderry, Ohio received 3 inches. Winter storm warnings were in effect for Minnesota's Twin Cities, with 6 to 8 inches of snow expected in near whiteout conditions. On Tuesday, Minneapolis will see wind gusts up to 25 miles per hour and a high of 6, which is 40 degrees lower than their Wednesday high of 46. Winds could gust as high as 60 miles per hour, causing significantly reduced visibility and blowing snow, according to the National Weather Service. A spokesman for the Minnesota State Patrol said in a tweet that troopers have responded to hundreds of crashes, spun out installed vehicles, as well as 11 jackknife semi-trailers, just between 4 and 9 p.m. on Wednesday. Governor Tim Walz authorized the state's National Guard to provide emergency relief services for motorists who are stranded in the winter storm, according to his office. So, yeah, weather events, severe wet winter conditions are on the way. We got rain and snow and ice, and actually I feel that I think it was either Wednesday, right? Like Wednesday night, I was trying to go out and do some deliveries, but it was really windy. And I feel like that front that was moving across had to deal with this. But yeah, I mean, I was pretty just the amount of wind that we were getting was pretty intense. So it just, it just goes to show the weather changes that are occurring and the intensity, right? It's moments like this where I'm glad that there's really no blizzard conditions out here, although it does get cold. But yeah, if there was some serious ice out here, I mean, when ice does hit Texas, it shuts everything down for real. So because we don't know what to do. But yeah, I saw that wind, and that probably was the system moving across from the Midwest. So we'll have to see there. But, they got to deal with the blizzard conditions and having to hunker down and just dealing with the roads. I mean, it brings people to a halt. And of course, that could affect the power systems, right? And people could lose heating. So, as this winter drags on, we'll have to see how these storms affect the area. And already people are food insecure. And yeah, who knows what's going to happen. So that's something to look out for. So I'll continue on with that. So we had that weather conditions and the winter conditions, those storms occurring. We also have an eruption in Hawaii with the Kilauea volcano, which is one of the more active volcano systems on the planet. Of course, they're saying this eruption is more controlled. It just goes to show that anything can happen, and people were like, "Oh, 2020 going out with a bang." So yeah. So quote from Associated Press. Quote, park rangers have cited dozens of people who have gathered at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park to witness an ongoing eruption of the Kilauea volcano. Rangers said those cited had ventured into the dangerous areas to take photos and videos of the volcano eruption that had created a lake of lava in its crater that was 554 feet deep on Thursday. All it takes is a slight change in wind directions, and these offenders could inhale a fatal dose of volcanic gas, Chief Ranger Jock Correo said. One misstep or a crumbling cliff edge, and they could plunge into that vast pit of molten rock or to the crater floor. We want to keep the park open so everyone can safely experience this beautiful new eruption, but when visitors enter closed areas, rangers must concentrate on these few individuals. This puts our staff in hazardous situations. The eruption was contained in an area of the park that had been closed since 2007 and where there are dangerous levels of volcanic gas, rockfalls, explosions, and volcanic glass particles, the Honolulu Star Advertiser reported. Fines for violating national park rules are set at $150, said Jessica Farrakhan, a spokeswoman for the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. The fines increase after multiple violations and can lead to being expelled from the park. Farrakhan Farrah Kane, I should say, had told the Associated Press that a crowd of cars had lined up at the park entrance to catch a glimpse of the eruption, which began on December 20th. One helicopter tour company, Paradise Helicopters, reported a substantial increase in bookings as a result of the eruption and following months of limited business due to the coronavirus pandemic. The company had booked all of its aircraft and pilots on Monday and conducted 9 flights, a number not seen since the pandemic began. Before March, Paradise Helicopters flew as many as 40 flights a day, said Bronstein Kosau, the company's operations manager. It's the first time the Hawaii volcanoes had erupted since 2018. The 2 years of relative silence came after more than 3 decades of constant eruptions from 1983 to 2018. Roughly 700 houses were destroyed during an eruption in 2018. Yeah, and that 2018 eruption was pretty significant, pretty severe. Trying to remember what the details were there, but it was kind of crazy just seeing like just a wall of molten rock and people just, you just got to leave, you know, there's nothing you can do. I just think it's just fascinating that, you know, they have this island paradise. And I was talking with one, I have a family friend who lived out in Hawaii for some time, and just like the insurance rates there, they're just so cheap because of the volcano there, right? Anyway, or maybe I have that reversed, who knows? But yeah, it's just, you know, this life there, you know, and you know, it's interesting to see how people are dealing with it today. And then you have to think, okay, imagine the native Hawaiians who have lived there for hundreds, thousands of years. They just had to live with an island that could explode at any moment. So it is, you know, of course they treat it as a god and such, but it just shows how insignificant we are in the grand scheme of things, and just how, you know, one day you can be living on paradise, and the next moment you're basically fighting for your life. Of course, they're saying this is more contained, so it's just something to keep an eye out for. And I'm not sure if there were any other volcanic activities around the world, but it's just something that I want to talk about. But it's just nice to see there. So again, so moving forward, this article that is on The Guardian, they're talking about a phenomenon where birds are dying en masse in the Southwest, the U.S. Southwest. And they're pointing to many things. They're pointing towards the climate crisis and wildfires and, you know, other possibilities, right? Quote from The Guardian, right? Thousands of migrating birds have inexplicably died in southwestern U.S. in what ornithologists have described as a national tragedy that's likely to be related to the climate crisis. Flycatchers, swallows, and warblers are among the species falling out of the sky as part of a mass die-off across New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Arizona, and farther north into Nebraska, with growing concerns there could be hundreds of thousands of dead already, said Martha Desmond, a professor in biology department at New Mexico State University. Many carcasses have little remaining fat reserves or muscle mass, with some appearing to have nosedived into the ground mid-flight. I collected over a dozen in just 2-mile stretch in front of my house, said Desmond. To see this and to be picking up these carcasses and realizing how widespread this is personally devastating. To see this many individuals and species dying is a national tragedy. Long-distance migrants flying south from tundra-landscaped Alaska and Canada passed over America's southwest to reach winter grounds in Central and South America. During these migrations, it is crucial they land every few days to refuel before continuing their journey. Historic wildfires across the western states of the U.S. could mean they had to reroute their migration away from their resource-rich coastal areas and move inland over the Chihuahuan Desert, where food and water are scarce, essentially meaning they starve to death. They're literally just feather and bones. Allison Salas, a graduate student at NMSU who had been collecting carcasses, wrote in a Twitter thread about the die-off, almost as if they had been flying until they just couldn't fly anymore. The southwestern states of the U.S. have experienced extremely dry conditions believed to be related to the climate crisis, meaning there could be fewer insects, the main food source for migrating birds. A cold snap locally between 9 and 10 September, the 9th and 10th of September, could have also worsened conditions for the birds. Any of these weather events may have triggered birds to start their migration early, having not built up sufficient fat reserves. Another theory is that the smoke from the wildfires may have damaged their lungs. It could be a combination of things. It could be something that's still completely unknown to us, Sitsalas. The fact that we're finding hundreds of these birds dying, just kind of falling out of the sky, is extremely alarming. The volume of carcasses that we have found have literally given me chills. The first deaths were reported on the 20th of August on White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Initially, incidents were thought to be unrelated, but thanks to online forums, ornithologists noticed that they were happening all across the region. Resident bird species such as curve-billed thrashers, great-tailed grackles, and white-winged doves do not appear to have been affected. Reports suggest some birds have been displaying unusual behaviors before dying, becoming lethargic, approachable, and congregating in groups. Species that normally rest in trees and shrubs have been hopping around on the ground looking for insects, said Desmond. Large avian mortalities during migrations are rare, and few have been as large as this one. Records which go back to the 1800s show these events are always associated with extreme weather events such as drop in temperature, snowstorm, or hailstorm. The largest event on record in the region was a snowstorm in Minnesota and Iowa of March 1904 that killed 1.5 million birds. The climate crisis is also changing the tundra landscape where many of these birds breed, while the destruction of rainforests in Central and South America is damaging their winter habitats. Since 1970, 3 billion birds have been lost in the US and Canada. Mass die-offs such as this can have an effect on populations of both common and sensitive species, Salas said. We're kind of coming at them from all sides. If you don't do anything to protect their habitat, we're going to lose large numbers of the populations of several species. Carcasses have been sent to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Forensic Laboratory in Oregon and National Wildlife Center in Wisconsin for testing, which is expected to take at least 2 weeks. Scientists are urging people in the area to log any sightings of dead birds on the citizen science website. iNaturalist. Tristana Bickford, the communications director at New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, said it was a possibility that the climate crisis had affected the migration. Until we get the actual reports back from the National Wildlife Health Center, we can't say what is happening or what is not happening, she added. So, there you go with the birds and the bees, right? The die-off there. So it's a lot of things. It's, they're pointing at the climate crisis. It very much has to do with the dwindling food supply, dying of insect populations, which is their food source, and also pesticides and different chemicals that we're using. They're just getting pummeled, and they're dying mid-flight. They're just falling out of the sky. So this is just what's gonna continue to be a trend. Of course, this is underreported, but this is what's gonna keep happening. It's interesting, because when I hear a lot of people in doubt over our mass extinction event that's occurring, I want to point to them and ask, okay, like when was the last time your windshield or your fender, your bender, right, whatever, when was the last time you had to scrub that out because you hit a swarm of insects, right? I mean, try to I haven't washed my car in a while, and it's basically clean. Maybe a little dust, but there's very little insects that have been splattered all over it. Where 30 years ago, if you went on a road trip, your car would just be covered in insects. So that's just one sign that most people will ignore and they'll just be in denial over. But there's that with the dying insects, and now we're seeing the birds. The birds are going. So again, that's just a sign of things to come. And they also pointed to wildfires having an effect there. So desertification is certainly going to affect migratory birds and their food supply, water. Again, what can you say? So that's happening there. And before I wrap up, I wanted to talk about also about the possibility of Australian wildfires just, keeping an eye on there, because I certainly see that the media will underreport it. Who knows? Or maybe, they already reported like record-breaking heat waves, and so we're just gonna have to see what happens, right? So I'm reading from New York Times. Quote, the first major blaze of Australia's wildfire season has now blackened roughly half of Fraser Island, an idyllic getaway north of Brisbane, renowned for its golden beaches and lush biodiversity. With evacuations order reaching residents on Monday, Australians who had hoped there wasn't much more to burn after last year's colossal fires are now grappling with a brutal reminder in a vast country that is fire-prone and especially vulnerable to climate change. The risk of record-breaking infernos never goes away. In fact, it keeps increasing. I'm sure it hits home for us as it has for everyone watching, said Jack Worcester, 34, some family whose family owns cathedrals on Fraser, a campground that was recently evacuated. There's no such thing as a normal fire season now. Any fire season can be a quite serious one. By this time last year, dried out forests outside Sydney had been burning for weeks, blanketing the city's skies with an orange-gray haze. But even though this year feels less overwhelming so far, one question hovers on the minds of many Australians, and it's the same ones that Californians were asking just a few months ago, and will ask again next year. How bad is it going to get? Fires tend to be measured and remembered with hard statistics, acres burned, houses and lives lost. But before the counting comes an impressionistic mapping of risk shaped by terrain, climate and human activity and chance. This year's seasonal outlook maps for Australia show a wide amoeba of red for areas of above average danger running through the grassy plains of central New South Wales, the state in the country's southeast, whose capital is Sydney. But you have to dig deeper to see that many other areas are also at risk. Fraser Island, for example, is marked normal fire potential. The blaze burning now, drawing firefighters on land and an aircraft above to douse the flames and locking down the island to visitors, is believed to have started by an illegal campfire lit by tourists on October 14th. In the big picture, fire is a natural part of Australian landscape. So even when we say that the year has normal or below normal risk, it doesn't mean there is no risk, said Naomi Binger, a climatologist with the government's Bureau of Meteorology. It means there is a much higher risk as there would be in an average year. Because of climate change, she added, the average levels of fire danger is increasing. It only takes 1 or 2 days to have a catastrophic result, she said. People should not be complacent. And continuing onward, they talk about connections with La Nina, making changes. So, again, this is just something to keep an eye on. And I'm looking at the radar, and they just have it it's mainly in the southeast. As they said, New South Wales. Again, that could be very wrong on how widespread it is. So we'll have to see how things transpire there. It's they're going to experience their heat, increased fire conditions, and who knows? I mean, because a lot burned in last year's fire season, so who knows how much had regrown. Again, that fire from the beginning of the year was an apocalyptic event, like not even an exaggeration. Like that seriously could be pointed like ecologically as a turning point, because it killed billions of animals. So like it devastated that area. And another aspect that I was thinking about was just the health effects also. There could be respiratory issues down the line for decades to come if these fires continue like that. I mean, I'm going to have to I don't know if those fire conditions will ever come to Texas, but I certainly would have to consider getting a gas mask or something if we do get into a position like that, because look at the smoke conditions from Australia and also on the West Coast, and just seeing the sun blotted out. smoke everywhere, and just breathing that the air quality. And even when you're inside, you couldn't escape it. So yeah, that's just something to consider. And hopefully it never comes for Texas. But like we had some pretty we had a burn ban, and there was a moment where like there were fires starting to pop up in the state. But luckily we got some rain in, and now things have calmed down. But it's just certainly something to think about and keep an eye out for, because Texas could easily be hit with a drought. I mean, I remember in 2011 there was a drought, and we were starting to like get some fire warnings in our area. So that's certainly something to look out for in Australia. Best luck to them and dealing with those weather conditions. So that is the majority of what I wanted to say for this episode. With the holiday season, as I said, just wanted to record and at least get one more episode out before the new year. And, I also wanted to give a special thanks to my Patreon followers. So now I have 2 Patreon followers. And, if you're listening to this in the public, you're getting a 48-hour gap. So if you follow my Patreon for $1, you would be able to get first access, early access, and also be able to speak to me and offer your input, send articles, whatever. So there's that. And I wanted to thank my Patreon followers. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Twitter. I've been trying to be a little more active there. And, now I'm starting to gain a little traction, which is exciting. But it's also a bit unnerving too, because now like people are starting to pay attention to you. And, Twitter can get weird. That's all I can say. So, having to deal with that, just getting more public attention. I'm a very reclusive person. So like, I know they say, if you can't stand the heat, don't get in the kitchen. But at the same time, it's just like, I want to step out. But I also like, I'm going to have to be careful about the things I say. And, it's just not get sucked into some drama, which, would put a spotlight on the show, which would be good. That kind of attention would be good. They say all press is good press, right? But, I don't want it, because it can get bad. It can get nasty, like getting doxxed and people swatting you or something like. So, again, it's just something that I have to look out for and navigate. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And also I wanted to talk about just future plans that I have, right? So thankfully I'm working now, so I get some cash and I can, save up some money, because I wanted to go hunting. I've been cooped up inside, and I haven't been out in the field, and this is a different time of year. So hopefully if I did go out, I wouldn't have to deal with that summer heat and humidity. Probably last longer out in the field. Of course, I kind of wasted this deer season. The deer season ends in the January 3rd, which I don't think I'll be able to do. But, my main quarry is wild feral hogs, so there's no real issue there. So yeah, I'll just have to plan out there. I was actually trying to think about, because I don't want to, because there's an ammo shortage, and I don't want to waste my ammo. So I was actually thinking about doing a primitive hunt with archery. So I'll have to learn how to shoot bow and arrow, and all that good stuff before I actually went on the field. So it's something that, of course, I need to save up for, I need to plan out, and just go for it, right? But it would be nice to do a hunting/camping trip, and I keep saying I'm going to do it, but it requires a gathering of resources, right? Planning, and also because I'm just going to do a solo trip, really, just telling other people where I'm at. So that's something I want to do. But if I do pull it through, then it'll be something to talk about in the show and my experience, because I'll just do it for a weekend or so. I mean, the National Forest is right down the road for me, so I can just go. That's why I like living out here. I really don't want to live out in the city. I like living out in this small town, because if I wanted to go in the woods, I could just go, So yeah, that's something to think about there, to talk about. And also just, with this new year coming out, 2021, I know on this show, I'm pretty pessimistic and not really looking out for things to get better. It's mainly because I'm not in a position to think, oh, well, things are fine, because I see all this good vibes 2021 coming from people who can afford to not give a shit, or who can afford to just ignore the issues, or I don't know, man. I slowly need to step away from social media, because I'm seeing all these people posting all this crap, like the material wealth or all the food that they're eating, all the good food. I'm just like, I can't with this, because I don't know, man. Because a part of me wants to like break that like normality that they feel, but it's mainly just because my life is kind of meh, whatever. I'm trying to navigate and trying to survive. I'm in survival mode. That's really what's happening. I'm in survival mode and just trying to get by. So, just seeing, it's very easy for me to appear that I'm envious, but it's more just like, as I said before, that disconnect from reality with social media, where people just post all this positive stuff that's happening with their life and all the good stuff and good food they're getting and all the gadgets and toys. And meanwhile, people like myself are having to scrape by every day and actually work, with our hands, or, putting our bodies on the line, and then we're told, well, you want affordable healthcare or college is an entitlement, it's just, yeah. Again, in the capitalist society, there's just little value and little apathy for people. I should say empathy, that's the right word, for working people. Every man's for himself. And yeah. So that's what's going to happen. I don't know, man. These next couple of weeks, I definitely predict, if they don't get this eviction moratorium under control, if they don't come to an agreement, January 1st is going to be a nightmare. And people are going to have a rude awakening. Or they're just going to completely ignore it. Oh, well, my life is fine. I don't know, man. So anyway, that's it for this episode. And I thank y'all for tuning in there, or here. So I got my Twitter, Collapse Talk Pod. I got my email, collapsetalkpod@outlook.com. Also got the YouTube channel, the Patreon. You can follow there for early access. So definitely appreciate y'all tuning into this episode. And, when I record again, it'll be a new year and we'll see what happens. Hopefully I'm incorrect on my assumptions of unrest, but, if they don't come to an agreement on Monday over this bill, over this stimulus, there's going to be hell to pay, really. So there's that. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you all have a safe and festive New Year celebration. Thank you.